In 2021, while drilling about 11 feet beneath the surface of permafrost in northeastern Siberia, researchers uncovered a 24,000-year-old frozen life form. And then, they brought it to life. Before cloning it, or better said, it cloned itself. This might sound like the beginning of a sinister horror story, but don't worry, it's actually quite the opposite. What scientists unearthed was a microscopic frozen organism that could fundamentally reshape what we think about evolution and survival. The uncovered tiny creatures are called bdelloid rotifers, microscopic animals with little wheel-like mouths that they use both for moving and feeding. They were first discovered in 1696 and are fairly common in freshwater environments around the world, with a few saltwater species. They might seem unremarkable, but scientists have been studying them since early microscopes made it possible to actually see them. Because even though there are only a few dozen microns wide, they're surprisingly complex, with brains, guts, muscles, and reproductive systems. Could it be that within that complexity lies the secret to ultimate resilience, maybe even for us humans? Let's break it down. These creatures are extremophiles. That means they can survive being completely drained of water at any point in their life cycle, then lie dormant until rehydrated. But that's not all. They can also persevere through some of the harshest conditions on Earth, or in outer space, or even being stuck in the Siberian permafrost wasteland for tens of thousands of years. This is possible because they can enter cryptobiosis, a condition where organisms pause their metabolism and become nearly inactive. It may sound sciencey, but actually, some of the everyday products we eat are stored in a fridge thanks to this phenomenon. Take yeast, for example. Live yeast cells are surrounded by a protective layer made of dead cells and some nutrients. You can keep yeast at room temperature, but if cryptobiosis comes into play, in the form of your fridge or freezer, it stores much better and longer. During cryptobiosis, rotifers accumulate protective compounds like chaperone proteins, which help them repair and recover once favorable conditions return. Chaperone proteins are like tiny bodyguards. Their job is to keep other proteins in the cell from falling apart under pressure. When the body is stressed, whether from heat, cold, toxins, dehydration, or just the natural aging process, the proteins inside our cells can start to misfold. Proteins need to be folded into very specific shapes to function properly, and when that structure breaks down, they become useless, or worse, harmful. Misfolded proteins can pile up and interfere with normal cell function. In some cases, they clump together in ways that poison the cell. This kind of damage is even linked to serious health conditions. So, if rotifers have developed powerful proteins that prevent cellular chaos even under extreme conditions, could we use them to protect human cells from diseases and aging? By analyzing the age of the ice they were found in, scientists figured out that these frozen rotifers were at least 24,000 years old. That's a huge leap from earlier studies, which showed they could survive frozen for only about 10 years. Now that's what you call record-breaking. This period of Earth's history is known as the Late Pleistocene Epoch, a time dominated by the Ice Age, which means these invertebrates were lying dormant when Manny and Sid were having their adventure while roaming the icy landscapes, along with saber-toothed cats and giant ground sloths. Fun fact: although animated movies like Ice Age show woolly mammoths as huge, towering giants, they were actually about the same size and weight as today's average African elephant. Nature and evolution can be so cruel, yet fascinatingly unpredictable. Massive, menacing beasts that came from the Ice Age couldn't survive it, yet something tiny and weird, like a bdelloid, could. But regarding our unfrozen creature, after the soil thawed, the organism didn't just begin moving again, it also started reproducing. This is thanks to an ability called parthenogenesis, a specific form of reproduction in which embryos develop from unfertilized eggs, allowing them to reproduce independently. It really is like cloning, but it happens naturally. Many organisms, such as certain insects, reptiles, and even some birds, are capable of parthenogenesis, at least under specific conditions. For example, in honeybees, males develop from unfertilized eggs through parthenogenesis, making them genetic copies of their mother. However, parthenogenesis is often seen as an evolutionary disadvantage because it limits genetic diversity, meaning that most species that reproduce this way eventually face extinction. Despite this, bdelloid rotifers have diversified into over 450 distinct species over millions of years, which is extremely rare. Scientists believe their survival comes down to a few evolutionary adaptations. They can pause their metabolism through cryptobiosis, repair their DNA with specialized proteins, and even borrow useful genes from other organisms using a process called horizontal gene transfer. Unlike most animals, which rely solely on inherited DNA, these organisms can steal genetic material from bacteria, fungi, and even plants, splicing foreign genes into their genome to gain new survival traits. Some studies have shown that up to 10% of their active genome comes from foreign DNA. This could explain their extraordinary resilience. They borrow genes for stress resistance, toxin breakdown, or radiation repair, essentially patching and upgrading their DNA in real time. It's not like the mind flayer from Stranger Things, where the creature absorbs another organism to improve itself and grow. It's more like a spy stealing a blueprint from a rival lab to learn its secrets. When cells rupture, for example, when bacteria die nearby, bdelloids scoop up loose DNA fragments and integrate them into their own genome. Interestingly, the usual expected lifespan of bdelloid rotifers under normal circumstances is only 2 weeks. The soil sample that contained these rotifers also held nematodes or roundworms, another group of tiny survivors already known to withstand tens of thousands of years icebound. This isn't just limited to microscopic animals. Researchers have successfully regrown Antarctic moss and entire Campion plants from seeds and samples frozen for hundreds or even thousands of years. In 2016, a team of Japanese scientists brought tardigrades, or simply water bears, back to life after 30 years in cryptobiosis. Tardigrades are even more impressive because they can live in a suspended state for up to 30 years, without food or water, and with temperature swings from deep freeze to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. These guys can also endure crushing deep-sea pressures, vacuum, microgravity, and intense radiation of space. Remember when we said earlier that these species can survive the harshest conditions on Earth and beyond? It wasn't an exaggeration, and now you understand why. And it's exactly why NASA and its partners sent water bears and bdelloid rotifers into orbit. They've even been aboard the ISS, helping scientists understand how these animals handle microgravity, radiation, and stress. Not only that, but in 2007, the European Space Agency launched a bunch of tardigrades into low Earth orbit, completely exposed. No suit, no shield, floating in a vacuum. They were blasted by cosmic radiation, UV light 1,000 times stronger than what hits Earth's surface, and temperatures near absolute zero. And when they came back, most of them woke up and reproduced despite the harsh conditions they were exposed to. This ties into an old theory called panspermia, the idea that life didn't originate on Earth but arrived here, locked in space dust or trapped inside a meteorite. Before, maybe it sounded like a fringe science, but when organisms can brush off cosmic radiation, then it doesn't seem so far-fetched, does it? What about humans? Does this mean we now fully understand the way hibernation works and are close to putting humans in this state? Sorry for spoiling it for you, but it still feels more like science fiction. However, researching rotifers, water bears, and similar organisms can lead to massive breakthroughs in other fields. Their resilience might be a blueprint for medicine, for reshaping what it means to age, maybe even to pause life itself, or extend it. We're talking real, practical innovations, from better preservation of human organs for transplantation to drugs that slow aging at the cellular level. And yes, maybe even cryogenic hibernation, long enough to make interstellar travel possible. You're digging in Egypt's famous Saqqara necropolis, also known as the ultimate VIP graveyard for pharaohs, when suddenly you find a giant pink door hiding something no one knew existed. Behind this giant stone door, one that wasn't supposed to open, by the way, you find a lost tomb of Egyptian royalty. Alright, history lovers, it's time to buckle up because archaeologists just pulled off something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. Let's travel all the way to Saqqara, one of Egypt's most mysterious and treasure-packed ancient sites. The star of the show? The prince you've probably never heard of, Prince Userefre, son of King Userkaf. No one important, just, the founder of Egypt's 5th dynasty. No big deal. But the way his tomb was discovered… It all started with a massive door, made of pink granite, no less. But this isn't just a regular stone slab. This thing is about 14 to 15 feet tall and 4 feet wide. A giraffe could easily walk through it. This door is also definitely heavier than your neighbor's SUV. But here's the twist. It wasn't a real door. It was a false door, a symbolic gateway meant to allow the spirit of the deceased to pass between the world of the living and the afterlife. Normally, that's where the story ends. After all, false doors are common in tombs. But this one was extra special. You see, false doors were usually made out of limestone, which was pretty common and found everywhere in Egypt. To build one out of red or pink granite, people had to bring these rocks from a quarry located 400 miles away. And you can bet this wasn't a cheap trip. According to Egyptologists, this is the first time a false door of this size and material has ever been found in Egypt, making it a totally unique piece of architecture. Aside from being super expensive, this one had a surprise behind it too. When the team of researchers investigated further, they realized that this false door actually hid a real entrance. And what did it lead to? A hidden tomb, packed with statues, relics, and secrets from over 4,000 years ago. The tomb belongs to Prince Userefre, but you can call him Wasar Efra, or Wasar Efra too. Despite being totally erased from history, this fella was no minor noble. The hieroglyphs on the pink granite door listed him as the hereditary prince, governor of Buto, and Nekeb, royal scribe, minister, judge, and priest of chance. Phew! He was like the ancient Egyptian version of Daenerys Targaryen. These inscriptions not only identify his political and religious roles, but also suggest he held significant power in Lower and Upper Egypt, bridging both regions through his titles. One title in particular, the priest of Sekher, links him to the deity of the necropolis, the one with the falcon head. This god was the patron of the living and god of the dead at the same time. So I guess the Forgotten Prince was sort of a big deal, considering that his tomb was placed in such a prestigious location within Saqqara. What's even more mysterious is that Prince Userefre doesn't appear in official king lists or royal family trees, which makes us wonder if he passed away before he could rule, or if his legacy was deliberately erased in one of ancient Egypt's classic political dramas. Some scholars now believe his erasure might be connected with shifting religious or political power struggles during the early 5th dynasty, especially as his father Userkaf was reshaping Egypt's religious order. And speaking of his father, King Userkaf was a total game changer. He wasn't just the founder of the 5th dynasty, he also kicked off a religious revolution by promoting the sun god Ra over older deities. That's right, Userkaf built the very first sun temple at Abu Sir, setting off a dynasty-wide obsession with solar worship. After Userkaf wrapped up his short but revolutionary reign, a whole lineup of pharaohs took the stage. Sahure, Neferirkare, Nusere-Ini, basically the boy band of the 5th dynasty. And these guys were all about two things: building pyramids and making money. They weren't just stacking stones, they were expanding Egypt's influence, opening up trade routes to far-off lands, and blinging out their temples like it was nobody's business. Back in the tomb, things got even cooler. There was a beautiful red granite offering table covered with inscriptions detailing ritual foods, like an eternal menu for the afterlife, because they believed the deceased could magically eat this food. Fun fact, it was the funerary priests and their families that actually ate the food. There were also pottery shards, amulets, and painted walls, but the real showstoppers were the statues. And this is exactly where things get weird, in a good way. The team found statues of King Djoser, the guy who built Egypt's first pyramid, his wife, and their 10 daughters, inside Prince Usarrefre's tomb. Hold up, Djoser lived a few centuries before Usarkaf, so what were his statues doing there? Turns out, scientists don't really know. These statues were built during the reign of King Djoser himself and probably belonged to that first ever built pyramid. Experts believe these statues were probably relocated during the 26th dynasty, thousands of years after Djoser, maybe to protect them from destruction, or maybe because they were still venerated. Basically, ancient Egyptians were hoarders, but classy ones. Scientists also know for a fact that some engravings and statues found there were made way later, which means that this tomb probably turned into a deposit for fancy stuff. Or maybe this was just really ancient interior decorating. Anyway, that wasn't all. There was another pink granite entrance on the eastern side of the tomb, with inscriptions linking back to King Neferirkare, another 5th dynasty pharaoh who also tried to build his own pyramid, but failed. And near this second entrance, archaeologists found something never seen before in Saqqara: a set of 13 pink granite statues, all sitting in a row on a high-backed bench, like they were waiting at the DMV of the afterlife. Some had elevated heads, probably representing the prince's wives, while others were missing their heads entirely. One black granite statue was found upside down. Maybe it had taken a tumble sometime during the tomb's long, quiet centuries underground. According to archaeologists, the positioning and head shapes suggest that these statues followed a strict social hierarchy, with the central figures likely representing higher status individuals, while the headless ones might indicate unfinished work or later vandalism. And speaking of black granite statues, another one was found standing proudly inside the tomb. Based on its design and inscriptions, it looks like it was placed there during the 26th dynasty, the same time those Djoser statues were probably moved in. This suggests the tomb didn't just sit abandoned, it was reused, adapted, and maybe even honored by later generations. And by the way, black granite was associated with Osiris, the god of the underworld, during the late period, which means that this statue's presence is a clue that the tomb was a ritual space long after the prince's death. All of this, giant granite doors, surprise statues, reused tombs, adds up to a truly thrilling find. Prince Usarrefre may not be a household name yet, but his tomb is now one of the most fascinating ever found in Saqqara. It tells a story not just of the Old Kingdom, but of how ancient Egyptians kept connecting to their past, even thousands of years later. So, what does it all mean? Why hide a tomb behind a fake door? Why pack it with statues from different eras? And who exactly was Prince Usarrefre? These are the kinds of mysteries that keep archaeologists digging and keep the rest of us fascinated. In the end, this discovery isn't just about one tomb, it's about how much is still waiting beneath the sands of Egypt. As more gets uncovered, we're reminded again and again that ancient history isn't gone. It's just sleeping behind massive pink granite doors. Have you ever visited a famous monument and thought, alright, this is boring? While you were up on the Eiffel Tower yawning at the view, another landmark in Paris was pulling off the ultimate plot twist. Hidden in plain sight at Place de la Concorde stands a 3,300-year-old Egyptian obelisk that's been keeping juicy secrets from Pharaoh Ramses II himself. That's right. Ancient secret messages carved in stone have been right under our noses this whole time. Nope, this isn't the next National Treasure movie. This is real life, and it took a real-life Indiana Jones to crack the code. So, let's set the stage. You've probably seen this block of stone before, right? Towering 75 feet high, this massive granite pillar was originally from Luxor, Egypt, and it's been chilling in the heart of Paris since 1836. It's covered in hieroglyphs, and for years, everyone assumed we'd already cracked their code. Mystery solved. Nothing left to see here. Enter Jean-Guillaume Olet-Pelletier, French Egyptologist, cryptology expert, and part-time monument whisperer. Basically, if Indiana Jones traded his whip for reading glasses and binoculars, you'd get this guy. He's got a rather unusual hobby. He strolls up to the obelisk every now and then and casually reads hieroglyphs. For fun. Yes, he can read them fluently. No, we don't know what that says about our own hobbies. Until 2021, experts believe that the inscriptions on the obelisk mainly praise the gods Amun or Amun-Ra, if you're on friendly terms, and Horus, the falcon-headed sky god with those super famous parents Osiris and Isis. But during one of his casual reading sessions, Olet-Pelletier noticed something odd. Some of the hieroglyphs weren't just singing praises to the gods, they were giving directions, literal directions, to the entrance of the temple of Luxor. But wait, it gets even better with a little backstory. Obelisks like this weren't just pretty lawn decorations. They were usually placed at the entrances of major temples, like the Temple of Luxor, where this one originally stood. They symbolized the sun god Ra and were meant to represent a ray of sunlight frozen in stone. Basically, they were giant sacred exclamation points showing off the pharaoh's divine connection and power. Ramses II had 2 of them set up at Luxor's entrance to honor the gods and, of course, to brag about himself. This one got shipped off to France in the 1830s as a gift from the ruler of Egypt, Muhammad Ali. No, not the boxer. And it's been waiting for someone to take a closer look at it. Moving the obelisk to Paris was no small feat. It weighed over 220 tons and had to be transported on a ship built especially for it, called the Luxor. How original. The whole transportation cost the modern equivalent to $19 million. Interestingly, its twin obelisk still stands in Luxor, which means that researchers can compare both structures to see if the story really matches. This pairing of obelisks was intentional, meant to guide the eye and the spirit towards sacred space. Lucky for us, Jean-Guillaume picked the perfect moment to snoop around. The obelisk was undergoing restoration for the upcoming Olympic Games. Scaffolding was up, giving him rare access to the tippy top of the monument. Armed with binoculars and a ladder, he got eye level with parts of the pillars that most of us can only squint at from street level. And that's when he uncovered the real twist. Turns out, ancient Egyptians didn't just chisel random symbols into stone. They had something way cooler up their sleeves: crypto-hieroglyphs. Those were specialized coded forms of writing used for sacred or elite messages. Basically, ancient VIP-only emojis. While your average temple priest could read standard hieroglyphs, crypto-hieroglyphs were reserved for the pharaoh's inner circle. Today, only 6 people on Earth can read them fluently. And wouldn't you know it, our French friend is one of them. Of course he is. Now, here's where things get wild. Normally, hieroglyphs written on monuments like the obelisk are read top to bottom, right to left. Simple enough. But Jean-Guillaume decided to break the rules and read them horizontally instead of vertically. That's when he started spotting weird patterns, phrases, and symbols that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 200 years. Some of these messages were so cleverly hidden, and you could only understand them if you walked around the obelisk in a certain way. He calls it 3D cryptography. That's right, the obelisk itself is like one giant ancient Rubik's Cube. Depending on the angle you read from, the message could change entirely. Yes, ancient Egypt invented something like the lenticular effect long before Pokemon cards made it cool. Okay, so what in the world does the message say now? Glad you asked. These aren't just random notes from the past. They're political gold. One inscription praises Ramses II as a divine figure who could not be dethroned. Another says the king made offerings to the god Amun, which wasn't just him being nice. This was a big political move. Back then, religion and power were totally intertwined, so showing off your divine connection was like launching a PR campaign, except instead of tweets, they used 200-ton stone monuments. Ramses II wasn't just any ruler, by the way. He reigned for over 60 years and basically pulled off the Beyoncé of pharaonic careers. He won battles, or at least said he did, built cities, temples, and statues of himself all over Egypt, and declared himself a living god. When he ordered these obelisks, he wasn't just creating monuments. He was launching ancient propaganda flyers at priests, nobles, and visiting dignitaries. In fact, Ramses II was so good at self-promotion, he may as well be the original king of rebranding. He claimed victory at the Battle of Kadesh, even though it ended in a stalemate and they had the victory carved into walls and monuments across Egypt. The Luxor obelisk was another way of reinforcing his godlike powers every time someone passed by or read its text. And here's the cherry on top. Some of these inscriptions were positioned just right so they'd be seen by nobles arriving by boat for a festival. That's probably the reason why they can only be read from a certain angle. But if you stood at the base of the obelisk, you wouldn't see much. But from a 45-degree angle standing right in the middle of the Nile, sweet stuff! Imagine pulling up to a religious celebration and seeing giant stone text basically saying, "Hey, Ramses is chosen by the gods, don't forget it." Subtle? Not exactly. Effective? You bet. Some messages even carry double meanings. One line might spell out Ramses II's full royal title. But read it differently and boom! It says he's got eternal life. That's next-level branding. You can almost hear him saying, "Look at me, still trending 3,000 years later." For decades, scholars thought this monument had given up all its secrets, but thanks to new access, modern tools, and some fresh eyeballs, we now know there's still a ton to uncover. Oleg Pelletier's full research hasn't been officially published yet, but the clues he's found are already shaking up what we thought we knew about ancient Egyptian monuments. Of course, not everyone's buying it just yet. Some scholars are skeptical, especially about the idea that boat-riding nobles could actually see those messages clearly. But let's be honest, ancient advertising wasn't easy. Even if your billboard is 75 feet tall, you still need the right angle and the right audience. So the next time you're in Paris staring at the obelisk while sipping your overpriced café au lait, remember, you're not just looking at a fancy paperweight from the 19th century. You're standing in front of an ancient Egyptian PR campaign, a 3D puzzle, and a 3,300-year-old flex from Ramses II himself. And let's be real, if that obelisk had been hiding messages this long, who's to say it's done talking? So grab your magnifying glass, channel your inner Egyptologist, and remember, the real treasure isn't gold or jewels, it's the drama chiseled in stone. Look at this giant donut-shaped region far away from Earth, beyond the orbit of Neptune. We're talking about a distance of more than 2.5 billion miles. It's the Kuiper Belt, and something eerie and bizarre is happening there. Dwarf planets and other small objects dwelling there refuse to cluster together. Instead, they follow particular orbits, which is weird. The reason might be a large, mysterious planet hiding beyond Pluto. Its gravity might be messing up the orbits of those Kuiper space bodies. Hear me out. Our solar system is made up of the Sun and everything that goes around it because of the star's strong gravity. This includes the 8 main planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. There are also smaller things like moons, asteroids, and Pluto. For a long time, people thought Pluto was the 9th planet, but when it was reclassified as a dwarf planet, scientists started looking for a new Planet X. Did they have a thing about odd numbers or what? And guess what? Some really think there might be a big, icy planet hiding far, far away beyond Neptune. This mystery planet is often called Planet 9. Now, Planet 9 hasn't been seen yet, but scientists think it might be out there because of some tiny, faraway space rocks called etnos that move following bizarre, confusing paths. These paths seem to be grouped together and tilted in a way that doesn't happen by chance. This could mean there's a hidden planet pulling them into place with its gravity. If Planet 9 is real, it might be 5 to 10 times heavier than Earth. It would also be super far away, hundreds of times farther from the Sun than Earth is. Over the years, scientists have guessed different distances for its orbit, and the newest guess in 2025 says it could be about 290 times farther from the Sun than Earth. There are some cool ideas about where Planet 9 came from. It might have started as a big planet that Jupiter once kicked out of the inner solar system, or it might have come from another star or even wandered around space on its own before getting caught by the Sun's gravity. Even though scientists have looked really hard using powerful telescopes, no one has actually seen Planet 9 yet, and so far, its existence is still just a theory. But recently, a group of researchers tried something clever. They used data from two special space surveys called IRAS and ACARI. These two looked at the sky in invisible light, far infrared, about 23 years apart, which is helpful because Planet 9 is supposed to move very slowly. The team focused on a special list from ACARI, which is better at finding faint, moving things in space. They guessed how bright Planet 9 might be and how fast it might move based on how big, far away, and cold it could be. Then they looked for matching blips in the sky that were seen by both IRAS and ACARI, but not in the exact same spot. That's because a real planet would have moved a little over 23 years, and they indeed found 13 possible matches that could be Planet 9. Their estimations were based on how far away the object seemed to be, 500 to 700 times farther from the Sun than Earth, and how heavy it might be, which is 7 to 17 times Earth's mass. After looking very carefully at all the images, they narrowed it down to one really good candidate. The two detections weren't in the same spot in both surveys, and the way they appeared in the ACARI map matched what you'd expect from a slow-moving object. It showed up on one date and wasn't there 6 months earlier. But of course, there was a catch. Apparently, the old data isn't good enough to figure out the exact path of the potential planet. So, the team wants to do new follow-up observations using a special camera called DCAM, which is really good at spotting faint, moving objects. That way, they can find out if this candidate is really Planet 9. Additionally, it can help us learn more about how our solar system works and how it formed. If Planet 9 is ever discovered, it would totally change the way we understand our solar system. It could explain why some far-out space rocks in the Kuiper Belt tilt weirdly. The thing is, most planets go around the Sun in a flat-ish circle, but those faraway objects are tilted about 20 degrees. Planet 9 might be the reason why. Next, we'd probably find out why those tilted objects seem to point the same way. Their orbits are grouped together in one direction. A big hidden planet's gravity could be hurting them like sheep. There are also some strange tilted objects super far away. They don't make sense unless something big, like Planet 9, is tugging on them. A few space rocks orbit the Sun backward between the big planets, which is kinda the wrong way. That's super weird unless something big is messing with them. Some far-out Kuiper Belt objects keep crossing Neptune's path and haven't been flung away. That's because Planet 9 might be helping keep their orbits stable over a long time. Another cool thing is that if Planet 9 existed, it would be a super-Earth, a kind of planet we see a lot around other stars, but we don't have in our solar system yet. So finding one here would make our solar system more like the others out there. Throughout history, people have been wondering if there could be hidden planets far beyond Neptune, even before Pluto was found. Back in 1880, a guy named George Forbes guessed there might be two unknown planets way out there. One about 100 times farther from the Sun than Earth, and the other about 300 times farther. He thought these mystery planets might be pulling on some comets and changing their orbits, kind of like how Jupiter does with the comets near it. In 2004, scientists found a weird little world called Sedna. It had a strange path around the Sun that didn't seem to be affected by any of the known planets. Its closest point to the Sun, called perihelion, is way too far for Neptune to be the reason. This made some scientists wonder if Sedna got pushed into its path by a hidden planet, maybe even something as big as Earth or bigger. Others thought maybe it was a star that flew by a long time ago, or another star that formed near ours. Then, in 2014, another odd object was discovered. It had a very similar orbit to Sedna, which made people even more suspicious that there could be something big out there messing with their paths. This kicked off a new round of the Planet X or Planet 9 hunt. At a meeting in 2012, a scientist named Rodney Gomez said that maybe there was a big, hidden planet around 1,500 times farther from the Sun than Earth. He thought it could explain the orbits of other odd objects, like some far-out comets and centaurs, small bodies that wander among the giant planets. At that time, those who supported the Planet 9 theory believed that if it existed, it would move around the Sun in a huge, stretched-out circle called an elliptical orbit. It would be about 400 to 800 times farther from the Sun than Earth is, about 13 to 26 times farther than Neptune. If it really had that kind of orbit, it would take around 10,000 to 20,000 years to go around the Sun just once. Plus, if it indeed orbited the Sun, it wouldn't follow the same flat path as the other planets. Its path would be tilted by about 15 degrees to 25 degrees. The farthest point in its orbit, called aphelion, would be in the direction of the Taurus constellation. As for the closest point, it would point towards Serpens, Ophiuchus, or Libra. As for the composition of Planet 9, it would probably be a lot like Uranus or Neptune. It would have a thick atmosphere made of hydrogen and helium, and it would be super cold, negative 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Its core would be made of iron, and its middle layer would be full of rock and water ice. At the same time, if the planet was smaller and denser, then it might be more like Earth, with a rocky surface instead of a gassy one. According to a scientist named Mike Brown, if Planet 9 was real, a space probe would reach it in about 20 years if we used a powerful slingshot path around the Sun. It's a perfect summer day. You're relaxing on the beach, dipping your toes into the cool water, when suddenly, bam! A 56-foot aquatic nightmare rockets from the waves. It's the size of 2 London double-decker buses, sporting about 60 razor-sharp teeth, including bonus chompers on the roof of its mouth, because why not? This aquatic beast isn't picky about its diet either. Sharks? Turtles? Other sea monsters? Yep, they're all on the menu. Meet the mosasaur, a group of marine reptiles that ruled the oceans millions of years ago. If you've seen Jurassic World, you'll recognize them as the stars of that epic moment when a massive creature leaps out of the water to snatch a great white shark like it's sushi. That's a mosasaurus, and it's every bit as terrifying as it sounds. Recently, scientists stumbled upon a fossil of one of those marine monsters in, of all places, Mississippi. Yes, Mississippi, the land of magnolias and catfish. Turns out it's also home to ancient sea dragons. This discovery was a happy accident. A team of geologists was mapping the terrain in east-central Mississippi when they noticed something strange poking out of the ground. It wasn't a rock or a seashell. It was a vertebra, and a massive one. In fact, it was so large it barely fit in the hand of the scientist who found it. The fossil likely belonged to the largest known species of mosasaur, the Mosasaurus hoffmanni. Now, the biggest mosasaur ever found clocked in at a staggering 56 feet long. This new specimen hit a solid 30 feet at least, And while it might not break the world record, it certainly makes the crown for the biggest mosasaur ever discovered in Mississippi. Fun fact, that's still longer than the average RV, and with way worse gas mileage. To be fair, the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science already had a couple of mosasaur fossils in its collection. But this newcomer might just steal the spotlight. And this isn't an isolated incident. In 2015, paleontologists unearthed the skull of a 24-foot-long mosasaur in North Dakota. Years later, a private fossil hunter, yes, that's a thing, found an equally huge mosasaur in Texas. Well, its jaw at least. These sea monsters, also known as sea dragons, by the way, actually have one of the wildest origin stories in paleontology. The very first skull was found way back in 1764 in a chalk quarry in the Netherlands. And at the time, scientists thought it was a whale. Then came a second skull, which was so impressive that French revolutionaries literally looted it during the siege in 1794. Legend has it they swapped it for 600 bottles of wine. Doesn't sound like a fair trade to me. That fossil actually helped pioneer the concept of extinction and got paleontologists buzzing for centuries. Since then, mosasaur fossils have popped up all over the world, like ancient scaly celebrities leaving their mark. From the Mississippi backwoods to the deserts of Morocco, from New Jersey to Belgium, scientists have uncovered everything from teeth to full skulls, sometimes even misplacing them in museum drawers for centuries. So what exactly were these terrifying titans of the deep? Well, let's just say, if ancient oceans had a most likely to eat everything in sight award, the mosasaur would win it. Picture a gigantic scaly torpedo with a mouth full of about 60 razor-sharp teeth, including some growing on the roof of its mouth like dental overkill. It had a long, muscular tail for propulsion and 4 paddle-like limbs that worked like turbocharged oars, letting it cruise through warm, shallow seas like a reptilian speedboat. Scientists believe they were close relatives of modern monitor lizards and snakes, which honestly just makes both of those animals way more terrifying. Some mosasaurs even might have had adaptations for sensing vibrations in the water, allowing them to detect movement from a distance, similar to how sharks use electroreception today. Their eyes were well developed too, giving them sharp vision in the dim ocean depths, a key advantage when hunting fast or elusive prey. But what really makes mosasaurs the stuff of prehistoric nightmares is their attitude. They were apex predators, and they knew it. Those sea monsters weren't picky eaters. Fish, turtles, birds, sharks, other mosasaurs. Basically anything that moved was dinner. Fossilized mosasaur stomach contents prove they practiced family dinner in the most metal way possible. If they were around today, your beach day would be a lot more exciting, and probably shorter. These guys were so intense, they dominated the whole world. It's safe to say, mosasaurs were the undisputed rulers of the late Cretaceous oceans. And like today's orcas or great white sharks, they probably used ambush tactics, sneaking up on prey from below before striking with explosive force. Bite marks found on the fossilized bones of turtles and even other mosasaurs suggest intense underwater battles worthy of a blockbuster movie. But how did one end up in Mississippi of all places? Well, rewind the clock about 80 million years and you'll find part of North America underwater. A vast, shallow sea known as the Western Interior Seaway split the continent in two, running from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. It was warm, teeming with life, and yes, crawling with sea monsters. This prehistoric seaway was a watery wonderland. Imagine long-necked plesiosaurs gliding through the water, birds with teeth diving for fish, and oysters the size of car tires clinging to reef-like structures. Even giant fish like this weird guy over here called it home. This ancient inland sea stretched over 600 miles wide in some places, but it was no more than a few hundred feet deep, making it ideal territory for predators like mesosaurs to thrive. The shallow depth also meant that their prey had few places to hide, turning the seaway into a prehistoric buffet. But the western interior seaway wasn't a permanent fixture. As the Rocky Mountains rose, the seaway slowly disappeared. Over millions of years, it transformed from a shallow ocean to swamps and then to dry land. Today, what was once an ocean is now the Midwest, complete with cornfields, cows, and the occasional mosasaur vertebra hiding in the dirt. Now, this wasn't exactly the end of the mosasaurs. Sadly, even these monsters couldn't outswim extinction. Those massive sea beasts met their watery grave around 66 million years ago, when Earth got an unwelcome visitor, a 10-mile-wide asteroid. When that space rock slammed into what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, it unleashed destruction on a planetary scale. The impact triggered massive tsunamis, set forests ablaze, and shot so much debris into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked out for months, maybe even years. This impact winter plunged Earth into a deep freeze. With sunlight gone, plants couldn't photosynthesize, and the food chain collapsed like a house of cards. On land, plant eaters starved, and predators like T-Rex soon followed. About 75% of all species on Earth disappeared. But don't think the oceans were a safe retreat. The seas were hit just as hard, if not worse. First came the mega tsunami that devastated marine life along coastlines. Then, the real villain arrived. You see, without sunlight, phytoplankton, those tiny microscopic plants that serve as the foundation of the marine food web, perished. With them went zooplankton, small fish and filter feeders. And when the buffet dried up, the big predators like the mosasaurs went hungry. No food, no future. With plunging temperatures and ocean acidification, even the ocean's top predators couldn't survive. Mosasaurs, along with plesiosaurs and ammonites, were wiped out in the blink of a geological eye. So ended the reign of sea monsters. The good news is that you can now swim at peace knowing that no sea dragon will ever come at you. I mean, it's a bummer that they went extinct, but let's be honest. Beach days are way more relaxing without 56-foot lizards crashing the party. The floor is lava. Haha, just kidding. But honestly, it's kind of falling apart. You might not feel it yet, but a huge part of North America has already lost 37 miles worth of rock from its foundation. And no, this isn't about earthquakes or giant sinkholes. It's about the continent losing pieces of the very thing that keeps the ground from wobbling around like a bad carnival ride. A team of researchers has just dropped a geological bombshell. Part of North America's ground is thinning out like a very sad, very slow ice cream drip. How do they know? They basically gave Earth a high-tech full-body MRI and created 3D maps showing how rocks once considered indestructible are now melting away into the planet's guts, like an upside-down cheese pizza inside an oven. But to really understand this mess, you first have to meet my old friends, cratons. Cratons are like the roots of the continents. They're thick, tough, and ancient. We're talking billions of years old. These bad boys survived meteor impacts, supervolcanoes, and even the tectonic movement of plates. If the plates got into fistfights, for example, you can bet we would see mountain ranges being born. If they got a divorce, drifting apart from each other, then a whole new ocean would be born. All of these things leave scars on the surface of Earth, but the cratons seem to always remain unfazed, like the cockroaches of geology. And since a craton can basically get punched in the face and feel nothing, scientists always assumed these things were nearly indestructible. But then, a group of researchers took their fancy machines to the test and realized that, wait, the cratons are falling apart? How? Enter the Farallon Plate, a really ancient tectonic plate that started to slide under North America's major plate over 100 million years ago. This is a pretty normal process, actually. It's called subduction, and it's how Earth recycles rocks and keeps itself from overheating. This subduction thing has been happening for so long that, by now, the Farallon is almost 400 miles away from the craton, sitting pretty chill at the lower mantle. weirdly close to the outer core of our planet. But the Farallon has been causing trouble, like that one roommate who moved out but keeps leaving weird stuff in the fridge. You see, as it sinks, it tugs on the bottom of North America's foundation, stretching it out and causing pieces to fall off into the deep mantle. And if that wasn't enough drama, the sinking Farallon has also leaked water and carbon dioxide into the surrounding rocks, making the craton even softer and easier to shred apart. Thanks, Farallon. Very cool of you. By studying hundreds of earthquakes across thousands of monitoring stations, scientists have confirmed the story. Big chunks of continental material are dripping downward, thinning the craton by as much as 37 miles. That's more missing rocks than can fit into a milk carton. Sounds dramatic, right? But don't worry. This is happening at a snail's pace. It'll take millions of years for anything noticeable to happen. Your great-great-great-great few grandkids from the distant future might still be standing on solid ground. But don't get too comfy. This thing may not be an urgent problem, but there's another type of sinking that's happening faster than you can say, "Help!" Here's the thing. By 2050, at least 32 major cities in the US, including New York, Baltimore, and Charleston, could be partially underwater. And guess what? This one is mostly our fault. Scientists noticed that since 2007, some cities have been sinking into the ground between 0.04 and 0.08 inches every year. Charleston, in South Carolina, is pulling ahead in the worst way possible, sinking 0.15 inches annually. Sure, these numbers sound tiny and a bit ridiculous, but Charleston is barely 9 feet above sea level, and a little sinking goes a long way when the ocean is breathing down your neck. On really bad flood days, people there have to abandon their cars and basically swim home. This whole phenomenon is called land subsidence, and when you mix sinking land with rising sea levels, you get a disaster cocktail of flooded streets, salty farmland, ghost forests, and a lot of very cranky homeowners. And it doesn't stop with just homes. Infrastructure like bridges, roads, airports, and power plants, all things we rely on daily, are also at risk of serious damage. Flooded electrical grids and sunken highways could cause billions more in economic losses and create major safety hazards for communities. Now, let's be fair. Not everything is humanity's fault. Some of this trouble dates all the way back to the Ice Age. About 12,000 years ago, massive ice sheets covered the northern US. They were heavy, like seriously heavy. The weight pushed the land down, and when the ice melted, the ground didn't just pop back up like a trampoline. Instead, it started playing a weird game of geological seesaw. The places that were squished started rising, and the places that weren't got pulled down. This whole process, called glacial isostatic adjustment, try to say that 3 times fast. But of course, humans found a way to make it worse. Groundwater extraction is a major culprit. Think of it like pulling the stuff out of the mattress. After a while, the whole thing just sags. In places like California's Central Valley, the land is dropping by up to 8 inches a year because we keep pumping out water during droughts. In cities like New York, the problem isn't just water. Skyscrapers themselves are making it worse. Yep, turns out if you stack millions of tons of concrete and steel onto soft ground, it tends to flatten. And in case you're wondering, the total mass of New York City's buildings is around 1.68 trillion pounds. That's about the same as 3.5 million statues of liberty piled up. With so much weight concentrated over a relatively small area, the underlying soils have no choice but to compress over time. And if you thought it couldn't get messier, think again. We've been building dams, which stop rivers from delivering fresh sediment to coastal areas. That sediment is kind of like Mother Nature's way of fluffing the ground back up. Without it, coastal lands are compacting like an old sponge. Plus, when wetlands are drained for agriculture or construction, the peaty soil dries out and collapses. Honestly, it's like the ground just can't catch a break. Scientists also noticed that the areas that used to be lush wetlands are now among the fastest sinking spots in the country, especially along the Gulf Coast. Louisiana, for example, is losing about a football field of land because of this mix of subsidence and rising seas. So what's the endgame here for us regular people who just want to live above sea level? Well, it's not looking great. Ghost forests, which are basically drowned woodlands, are popping up. Farmland is turning salty and unusable. And even sunny day flooding, where streets flood without any rain, is becoming a thing. Yikes! Meanwhile, over on the West Coast, California is not exactly winning either. San Francisco and Los Angeles are both sinking, which means that rising sea levels could hit them twice as hard and twice as fast. In some places like the Palos Verdes Peninsula, the ground has been sinking so fast, people over there might as well live like moles. So, is America turning into the next Atlantis? Probably not next week, but without serious action, like cutting back on groundwater pumping and planning smarter cities, at least 500,000 people are in serious danger. And the housing damage could easily rack up a jaw-dropping $109 billion by 2050. In the end, while North America isn't about to sink like a poorly made souffle, it's definitely showing some cracks in the crust. So maybe let's ease up on groundwater pumping, rethink how and where we build, and invest a little more in keeping our feet dry. After all, if the floor really does become lava someday, we're gonna wish we had at least fixed the leaks first.
Well, it's official. There is life on Mars. No, it's not a clickbait. Let me break it down for you. Most people imagine extraterrestrial life as little green and preferably intelligent people. But we need to distinguish between life and intelligence. When someone tells you there's life on another planet, you probably immediately think about some smart being you can converse with. But life is something different. It's often associated with organic. And NASA's Curiosity rover has found the biggest organic molecules ever seen on the red planet. They were hiding in super old Martian rocks, and I mean about 3.7 billion years old. These kinds of molecules can be leftovers from stuff like fatty acids, which help build cell membranes. It may not be the life we're used to thinking of, but at the very least, the ingredients for what we call life have been there. So NASA's Curiosity rover has been cruising around a huge crater on Mars called Gale Crater. Scientists think this crater used to be a lake several billion years ago. The rover's main job is to find out if Mars ever had the right conditions for life. And one day, Curiosity drilled into a chunk of ancient mudstone in a spot called Cumberland. It collected some rock powder, and scientists ran a special test on it using a tricked-out oven built into the rover. That oven gets really hot, about 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Luckily, the experiment's conditions allowed the researchers to cook off molecular oxygen, which limited the risk of combustion. And they found something surprising: chains of carbon atoms, up to 12 atoms long. You can find similar chains on Earth in everything from crude oil to, here we come again, living things. You may say that so far, the discovery doesn't sound too earth-shattering. But wait! Yep, these molecules can form naturally through non-living processes, like reactions with water, heat, and minerals. Hydrogen, carbon monoxide, heat, minerals – well, that's enough to cook up these molecules, even without biology. At the same time, such molecules are also common byproducts of life. Here on Earth, we produce similar compounds all the time, especially as carboxylic acids, which are everywhere in living organisms. So, even though these chains might have formed naturally, they could also be leftovers from something once alive. Maybe microbial life, maybe something way more complex. We just don't know yet. But the most unusual and intriguing thing about the molecules is that these carbon chains are pretty fragile. On Earth, sunlight, air, and water would break them down over time. Yet, they're still on Mars after billions of years. So, even if these molecules don't belong to Martian dinosaurs, we now know that the red planet is good at preserving organic stuff. And this is huge for the search for ancient life. There's a good chance that chemical traces of that life might still be hiding in the rocks, and apparently, Curiosity is capable of detecting them. Now, by the way, this is not the first time Curiosity has found organics. It's also picked up chlorinated organics, sulfur-containing stuff, and nitrates, basically ingredients that, if life ever brewed on Mars, would have been part of the recipe. Now, how about we talk about another hero sent to Mars to make incredible discoveries? Meet Perseverance. It's a car-sized robot NASA once sent far away from home to the inhospitable and dry red planet. In particular, to an ancient crater called Jezero. The Jet Propulsion Lab created Perseverance and prepared it for its first space journey, which started on July 30, 2020. For 7 dark, lonely months, the robot was traveling through the cosmos. Luckily, it managed to land on Mars safely on February 18, 2021. NASA even gave its landing spot a cool name, Octavia E. Butler Landing, after the famous science fiction writer. Since then, Perseverance has been busy exploring the red planet. As of April 8, 2025, it's been active for 1,469 Martian days, which are, by the way, called sols. That's about 1,510 Earth days, or a little over 4 years. The rover looks a lot like its older sibling, Curiosity, but it boasts some upgrades. It's literally loaded with tech: 7 scientific instruments, 19 cameras, and even 2 microphones to record sounds from Mars, like the wind or the crunch of the rover's wheels over rocks. Perseverance also brought along a tiny flying buddy. It's a mini helicopter named Ingenuity. Ingenuity made history by performing the first powered flight on another planet on April 19, 2021. It was only meant to fly a few times, but it kept going and made 72 flights in total. Unfortunately, on January 18, 2024, it got damaged during a rough landing, so NASA officially retired it. As for Perseverance, it has big goals. It's searching for signs that Mars once had life, especially in areas that used to have water. In its search, the rover is trying to figure out if the red planet even had the environments that could have supported life. It's also searching for past microbial life, collecting rock and soil samples to bring back to Earth one day, and testing out cool tech, like making oxygen from the Martian air to help prepare for future human missions. After landing in Jezero crater in 2021, Perseverance got to work right away, starting with its first campaign called Crater Floor. It drove south from its landing site and explored a spot called Saita. Then it returned to Crater Floor, Fractured Rough, and collected its first rock sample there. This was just the beginning of its exploration of Mars history. In its second campaign, Fan Front, the rover made its way toward an ancient delta where a river used to flow into the crater. Perseverance climbed up a valley to check out higher ground, looking for more clues about the past of the red planet. The third and fourth campaigns, Upper Fan and Margin Unit, had the rover studying rocks that could tell us more about the planet's climate and whether it could have supported life. In December 2024, they started planning Perseverance's fifth campaign, Northern Rim. It's supposed to study the crater's rim where rocks from deep below the surface were blasted to the top during an impact billions of years ago. Perseverance has made some awesome discoveries so far. It found volcanic rocks on the crater floor that showed they interacted with water. This was a surprise, because scientists thought the rocks would mostly be sedimentary, not volcanic. At a place called Wildcat Ridge, the rover even found signs of an ancient lake that could have supported life. The rocks Perseverance has found are great at preserving potential signs of past life, so this is a really big find. The rover has also discovered some of the sediments in the delta were deposited by calm waters, but later massive floods brought large boulders into the crater. It means that Mars's climate must have been changing over time. Now, on top of that, Perseverance has done a few cool experiments. The MOXIE experiment, managed to produce about 4 ounces of oxygen from the Martian atmosphere. It could be really helpful for future human missions. The rover also used its microphones to study sounds on Mars. It turned out that sound traveled more slowly there than on Earth. Plus, it was quieter on the red planet. The rover's Pixel tool analyzed rocks and found a bunch of minerals like ovoline, clays, and carbonates. This discovery showed that water had always played a big part in shaping Mars. The RIMFAX radar also helped the team see that the crater floor was made up of solid rock and volcanic material, and that the delta had formed in a calm lake-like environment. All in all, Perseverance has been giving us a much clearer picture of Mars's past. It's discovering evidence of volcanic activity, water, and environments that could have been suitable for life. It's also helping scientists gather crucial data for future missions. By studying the planet's geology, atmosphere, and potential for life, Perseverance is setting the stage for future exploration, and one day, maybe even for humans to walk on Mars. A super small robot can create its own clones. This robot is so small that if you line up 1,000 copies of it, they would be as large as one single human hair. Wow. It sounds like something from sci-fi, but it's not. These tiny robots are real and could revolutionize medicine, or if things go wrong, turn the planet into a lifeless wasteland. These tiny robots are what we call nanobots, things just a little bit bigger than a single atom of gold. While common-sized robots are usually made from metal and electronic components, these nanobots are made of DNA, the same stuff that makes you, well, you. But instead of using DNA to build a human, scientists have figured out how to fold DNA into tiny shapes, like origami, and create microscopic machines. These machines can do some pretty amazing things, like repair damaged DNA or clean up toxic waste in the ocean. They're like the Swiss Army knives of the microscopic world. But here's the twist. If you put these robots in a place with extra DNA, they can use it to build copies of themselves. That's right, they can self-replicate. And if they get into your bloodstream, they could, theoretically, use your DNA as building blocks to create an army of clones. Pretty cool, but also very terrifying. Now, let's say a researcher decides to test these nanobots in a lab. They drop one tiny bot into a bottle filled with DNA and other molecules it can use. The bot gets to work, rearranging the DNA to create a clone. That clone makes another clone, and suddenly, you've got a microscopic factory pumping out nanobots faster than you can say, uh-oh. It gets worse when you realize that these bots grow exponentially. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, and, after just 10 hours, you'll have 68 billion nanobots in that bottle. Once they've used up all the DNA in the bottle, they'll start looking for more material to feed their cloning frenzy. This is where things start to go south. You see, these nanobots aren't picky eaters. They can break down not just DNA, but pretty much any organic molecule they can find. If this bot can eat anything, it means it can also eat normal carbon atoms. And the moment they all run out of the supplies inside the bottle, they'll start looking for new material outside of it. And, well, carbon is the one element that is common to all living things. This basically means that every animal and plant in the world is made of carbon. Carbon is also the second most abundant element in the human body. You get the memo, right? Carbon is the building block of life, so now every living thing has become food for these nanobots. Those bots are now a huge school of fish attacking a shark, and all they know is making clones. That's basically their whole life. So when the swarm of nanobots eventually escapes the lab, they'll start devouring everything in their path. Forests? Gone. Crops? Gone. Wildlife? Also gone. The nanobots will break down all organic matter into smaller pieces and transform them into new nanobots. Even bacteria and viruses will get eaten, which might sound great until you realize that ecosystems rely on these tiny organisms to function. Without them, the food chain collapses. Bees starve because there are no plants to pollinate. With no bees, the remaining plants can't reproduce, especially if we consider that 85% of plants with flowers need animals like bees to survive. With no plants, herbivores will be the next on the extinction list. When they're gone, carnivores will perish too, because there are no herbivores to hunt. And humans? Well, we're not exactly at the top of the food chain anymore. In less than 2 days, there will be so many nanobots that they will be heavier than Earth. When all the organic matter, this means plants, animals, and obviously us, is gone, these robots will turn to the next best thing – inorganic materials, like soil, rocks, and water. Of course, if we're talking about inorganic things, we must include buildings, roads, and other human-made structures too. In only a few days, Earth's surface will begin to disintegrate. While eating everything in their way, these nanobots will release waste products. Yes, it's robot poop, except their poo is actually a ridiculous amount of heat that could increase the average temperature of our planet and destroy the ozone layer. If the nanobots are fast enough, humans won't be able to stop them in time. Without food, water, or shelter, civilizations will collapse. If people in some countries manage to survive, they will be living in a wasteland. Now, before you start building a bunker, let's take a deep breath. While the gray goo scenario is a fascinating thought experiment, it's not exactly realistic, at least not yet. First, these nanobots aren't fully independent. They rely on external triggers, like UV light or specific temperature changes, to function. Without human intervention, they'll just sit there like tiny useless paperweights. Second, they're picky eaters, for now. So far, these bots can only use specific parts of DNA to build clones. They can't just chow down on any organic molecule they find, unless someone programs them to. Which brings us to the next point. It's all about intent. The gray goo scenario isn't something that could happen by accident. It would require a deliberate effort to create nanobots that are both self-replicating and capable of consuming everything in their path. And let's be honest, except for Dr. Evil, most scientists aren't in the business of destroying the world. Finally, these nanobots are not invincible. They produce waste in the form of heat and toxic gases. And if too many of them were working at once, the planet would heat up to the point where they'd literally cook themselves. And even if they could survive a ridiculously high temperature, the things they eat, plants, water, us, would not. So no food, no clones. Simple as that. Now that the doomsday scenario is out of the way, let's discuss the cool science-y part. These tiny guys can help humans cure health conditions without surgery, clean up polluted oceans, or even produce insulin for people who have diabetes. These nanobots could revolutionize medicine, environmental science, and technology. They're like the ultimate multitaskers, if we use them responsibly. The gray goo scenario might sound far-fetched, but history is full of examples where well-intentioned ideas go horribly wrong. Take Australia, for instance. In 1935, the country imported cane toads from Hawaii to eat the beetles that had been destroying sugarcane crops. Fast forward to today, and there are over 200 million toads wreaking havoc on local ecosystems. The beetles? Well, they're still munching away, completely unfazed. So it's a classic case of good idea, bad execution. Technology also makes mistakes, like when we created bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics or malaria mosquitoes that are resistant to DDT. The same principle applies to nanobots. If we're not careful, we might create a problem far worse than the one we're trying to solve. That's why scientists are working on fail-safes, like UV lights or certain temperatures. They also use rare materials, such as diamond or titanium, to build nanobots, so they won't have much material to use if they wanted to start a clone war. Authorities are also keeping a close eye on who's developing this tech and why. After all, the whole gray goo scenario depends on just one ill-intentioned person with a lot of knowledge at hand. Of course, it is a cautionary tale, not a prediction. It reminds us to think carefully about the technology we create and the potential consequences of our actions. Nanobots could save lives, clean up the planet, and push the boundaries of science. Or they could turn the world into a lifeless pile of gray goo. The choice is ours. So, the next time you hear about a breakthrough in nanotechnology, remember, with great power comes great responsibility. And maybe keep an eye on those tiny robots, just in case. So, in the end, will the sun be to blame for destroying our planet? Or how about a huge meteorite? Or some kind of disease? Probably not. It seems that life will disappear for a very unexpected reason. Humans, animals, insects, fish, and most microbes will be wiped off the face of the Earth because of oxygen, or more precisely, because of its absence. Recent research has shown that the number of freshwater reservoirs with very low or no oxygen levels in coastal areas is increasing worldwide. Over the past 65 years, 4 times more oxygen-deficient waters have appeared in the world's oceans. What does it all mean? It's likely that life on Earth will vanish much sooner than the sun's energies dries up all the oceans. The end is likely to come in a little more than 1 billion years. But this doesn't mean that the planet will disappear too. The period when Earth is filled with oxygen will make up just about 20 to 30% of the total lifespan of the planet. So we're just temporary guests here. Just think how long that is, 1 billion years. The first Homo sapiens appeared only about 300,000 years ago. That is, the entire history of humanity occupies less than 500,000 years. So relax. 1 billion years won't pass very fast. By that time, humans won't be on Earth anymore. We might master space travel and find a new planet in the vast depths of space. But why can we lose air? As the sun heats up, the planet gets warmer and warmer, and this heat breaks down carbon dioxide, the gas which is necessary for all plants to photosynthesize. Without carbon dioxide, they can't produce oxygen. With a drop in carbon dioxide levels, the methane content will increase, and this gas is quite harmful to us. Now, this all sounds logical, but this is a secondary reason for the lack of oxygen. The real problem is something else entirely. As the sun becomes brighter, it will begin to heat rocks on Earth, such as granite and basalt. These rocks will start to break down faster. When they collapse, they take carbon dioxide from the air, which warms our planet. If there's less carbon dioxide in the air, Earth should become colder. But there's a problem. The sun will shine more, and its heat will outweigh this cooling effect. So even if rocks take away carbon dioxide, the sun will blaze so much that Earth will still become extremely hot. Next, when the sun shines more intensely, it, along with other natural factors, contributes to the breakdown of granite and basalt. These rocks mix with carbon dioxide and water to make carbonates, which go deep into the Earth. This takes carbon dioxide out of the air, which means plants can't make as much oxygen because they need carbon dioxide to do that. Besides, volcanoes release gases, which also reduce the amount of oxygen in the air. So the sun, by destroying rocks, affects what happens inside Earth and controls how much oxygen there will be in the air. In about 1 billion years, the sun will become so bright that no rocks will be able to save Earth from its heat, and the escaping gases will halt photosynthesis and oxygen production. And then, our planet will return to the state it was in about 2.4 billion years ago, to the time when the Great Oxidation Event began. And this event was much more important than, say, the first Olympic Games or the appearance of humans on the planet. Billions of years ago, there was almost no oxygen on Earth. Instead, there was a soup of gases, such as nitrogen, ammonia, methane, carbon dioxide, and others. Yes, we have these gases in the atmosphere today, but there used to be a lot more of them in the past. It was difficult for any form of life to originate in such conditions. But after some struggle, it succeeded. At first, Earth was inhabited by the simplest bacteria, including cyanobacteria. They learned how to make oxygen using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. These bacteria worked for millions and billions of years and made so much oxygen that it began to accumulate in the air. This was what we now call the Great Oxidation Event. It was like a great celebration of life, because with oxygen, new living beings could appear. But by the way, cyanobacteria didn't learn photosynthesis because they were like, oh, let's make oxygen, it's so cool. No, oxygen was just a byproduct. Cyanobacteria wanted only one thing, to get as much energy as possible. And for this, they learned photosynthesis. It helped them store energy using sunlight. They used special pigments to absorb light, and the result of this process was the release of oxygen. This had been going on for hundreds of millions of years, and then, at some point, they made too much oxygen. This oxygen started to spoil other gases that had been there before. For example, it ate a lot of methane. Because of this, Earth cooled down a bit, and the Ice Age began. But that's another story. In short, in 1 billion years, we risk going back to that difficult time. But let's hope that we'll manage to move to another planet on our spaceships or come up with some other solution. And what'll happen to our home planet next? Will new life be able to originate there without so much oxygen? Well, it's possible, but it'll be much more difficult. This will require another source of energy besides the sun. It can be, for example, hydrothermal vents. And by the way, there are ecosystems on Earth that use this type of energy. You can find one of them in the Mobile Cave in Romania. Imagine a place where there's little oxygen. It's dark. The sun's rays don't reach there. Over millions of years of evolution, a unique and slightly creepy life has developed in this cave. It was first discovered in 1986, and scientists are still exploring this place. The entrance to the cave is just a small hole in the ground. A narrow tunnel goes deep underground. Inside the cave, the air is filled with hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide, and there's half as much oxygen there as on the surface. A human can't stay there without a special mask. But for local forms of life, this is home, and they feel great there. There are several dozen species living in the cave, and many of them aren't found anywhere else on Earth. Here you can see strange little monsters, white snails, white spiders, centipedes with long whiskers, transparent shrimp, and even unknown species of leeches. Since there's no light in the cave, all these creatures don't need eyes. They're blind, but they have long sensitive antennae and paws that allows them to navigate in the space. They also have no colored pigment, so all these bugs and spiders are either white or transparent. But if there's so little oxygen there, and nobody does photosynthesis, then how does all this life survive? It's all thanks to the unique bacteria autotrophs. They absorb carbon dioxide and produce nutrients. These bacteria are food for other organisms, and those, in turn, become food for larger creatures. So a whole food chain has been built in the cave, which provides all the inhabitants with food. Evolution has created a unique ecosystem that exists separately from the rest of the world. It's like a small universe that has developed according to its own rules. However, this universe is not expanding, because all living beings here can't live away from hydrothermal vents and autotrophs. Otherwise, where would they get their energy from? But let's imagine that the sun cools down, almost all the oxygen disappears, and the entire planet gets covered with hydrothermal vents. It's dark, and the air is filled with methane, CO2, and other substances. And somehow, life begins. Even people appear at one point. What would they look like? Pale, thin, and blind creatures with very long arms that help them navigate in space. They have pets, large centipedes or cockroaches that move silently on the ground. People are also quiet because they don't have lungs filled with air to scream. There's silence in the world. People communicate through touch. No one travels. Everyone lives separately next to their hydrothermal source. The whole world has turned into a horror movie in 1 billion years.
Shh, just be quiet. You might scare them off.
Who are them? It's midnight and we're in the middle of an old railroad. There aren't any souls.
Wow, is that real? You see that? Blue and green flying lights. Yeah, it's creepy, dude.
Locals say those are women wandering around this place searching for their husbands who once got in a train accident, and these are their lanterns.
A train accident? When did this happen?
I don't know, more than 100 years ago, maybe.
You mean these lights are? Dude, let's get out of here. They're getting closer.
Two guys run away in horror from a sinister railroad where people have been seeing strange, mysterious lights for years. And could you tell? I did both voices. Well, anyway. But it's not only about the railroad. In the nearby houses, doors slam on their own. People hear footsteps. Some objects move out of the blue. Silence becomes ominous. Birds behave strangely. Animals get worried. People hear creepy whispers. Cars shake slightly. Some people experience scary visions. In short, welcome to Somerville, a small town located in South Carolina. If you don't believe in all these stranger things, then you can check it out for yourself. Talk to people who live there and they'll share bizarre stories with you. Yeah, maybe you won't hear whispers or see a shaking car, But if you're really interested, go to the old railroad and wait for a phenomenon called Somerville Lantern. You're unlikely to solve the mystery of the Somerville Lanterns by yourself, but if you still want to play the role of a detective for a while, here are some clues for you. No one knows exactly how people spotted the lights there, but the first mentions date back to the middle of the 20th century. People wrote about glowing spheres. Most often, these were green and blue. They were hovering over a narrow section of the Sheep Island Road. Now, keep in mind that in the past, builders made some road repairs in that area, and they didn't remove some parts of the old rails before installing new ones directly above them. In short, there's a huge pile of metal hiding here. Okay, let's move on. The next detail concerns not only Somerville, but also the nearest cities, and this is some serious seismic activity. In 1886, the small town of Charleston faced the most devastating earthquake in the southeastern United States. It became one of the most tragic events in eastern North America. On August 31st at 9:51 p.m., strong tremors destroyed many houses. Absolutely all the buildings in this small town were damaged. Loads of people were hurt. The damage from the disaster amounted to about $5 to $6 million. In the 19th century, this was a huge sum, equivalent to about $170 to $204 million today. Seismic activity damaged the railroad along a 50-mile stretch. The steel rails got S-shaped curves, the tracks were displaced, and traffic stopped completely. Sand craters formed on the ground, and fountains of water poured from them. Cracks formed along the banks of canals and streams, and trees were uprooted. Yeah, it all sounds terrible, but what does it have to do with our town? Somerville is located 15 miles northwest of Charleston, and of course, the disaster affected it too. Now, you probably understand why builders had to repair the railroad, and I hope you remember that they simply buried some old metal parts underground. Okay, now we know about the seismic activity in that region. This might explain why some cars shake, why objects move, and why doors close all on their own. But what about the lights? Do you think they might also be caused by an earthquake? Well, you're absolutely right. There's such a phenomenon as earthquake lights. The U.S. Geological Survey describes them as glowing spheres, discharges, or sparks that appear in some places before, during, and after earthquakes. But unfortunately, scientists know too little about all this. The thing is, earthquake lights are a rare phenomenon. There's no systematic and clear scenario according to which they can appear. There's a powerful earthquake in one place, and these lights don't appear. There's a slight tremor in another place, and the lights are hovering over the ground. We know too little about them, but it seems to be enough to solve the mystery of Somerville. When an earthquake occurs, the tectonic plates of Earth's crust shift. Various gases are released from the deep bowels of our planet. I can relate. Then some chemical reactions occur, and they start to glow and turn blue and green. But what gases have such properties? Call any chemist to help you with the investigation, and you will get the answer. Methane and radon, for example, are ideal for creating eerie lights. Now, by the way, there's another version. It's possible that seismic activity deforms minerals inside the Earth's crust, and thus creates an electric charge that makes air molecules glow. But let's focus on the gas theory. So, underground gases leak out during earthquakes. Then they ignite, and voila! We have the legend about a woman looking for her husband on the railroad tracks. But wait a minute, there are a couple more questions. What ignites these gases? The area where people observe this phenomenon is surrounded by nature. There are no houses, farms, or gas stations there. Only metal tracks. And radon and methane need a spark to ignite. Okay, try to guess. How can railroad tracks produce a spark? Do you remember what happened to the old railroad when constructors built a new one? They left it in the ground. That is, piles of scrap metal lie under the new railroad. Let's say, at one point, another earthquake occurs. Those underground metal parts rub into each other and create a spark. At the same moment, radon or methane leaks out, and we see those colorful lights. Congratulations, the investigation is over. But don't rush, this is just a guess. Scientists who are trying to solve this mystery have not proven the exact cause yet. But facts point to this theory. For example, in August 1959, a small earthquake occurred. And you know where it was? Just 2.5 miles from the road where people most often notice the Somerville lights. At the end of 1960, a couple more weak earthquakes were recorded in the area. On the other hand, there were a few earthquakes, but people saw the lights much more often. So, what's the explanation? Seismic activity can be unnoticeable there and take place every day. Such earthquakes are so weak that people don't notice them, but strong enough for methane and radon to come out. When did all this seismic activity start? It seems it began at the end of the 19th century, when the worst earthquake occurred in Charleston. The big earthquake triggered many small ones that are still shaking the ground. Earthquakes can also explain the strange behavior of animals and birds. Animals are more sensitive to seismic activity, and every tremor scares them. Okay, but what about those whispers and the sounds of footsteps that people hear? What about creepy visions? Well, most likely, it's just human imagination. Where strange things happen, people tell hundreds and thousands of stories to each other. Someone exaggerates and someone hears something differently. That's how scary stories that have nothing to do with real life appear. Like social media. What will happen next? Scientists will probably adjust their theory. To do this, they need to check the presence of radon and methane in the fault sites and conduct a couple of experiments. For example, artificially ignite these gases and see what happens. It's also necessary to track the time when the lights appear and compare it with the time of seismic activity. If these two factors coincide, the case will finally be solved. This information will help seismologists around the world learn more about the geological features of Earth's crust. Moreover, research in this area will help predict earthquakes in advance, which could save many lives in the future. Okay, the Somerville lantern case is solved. How about investigating other cases with strange lights? Yes, people have observed similar phenomena all over the world. For example, mysterious lights in the swamps, Marfa lights in Texas. In 1997, people saw 3 flying lights in the night sky in Phoenix, Arizona. Well, get some rest and proceed to the next investigation.
There's a monster hiding in the remote forests, swamps, and rivers of the Congo Basin in Central Africa. It has a long neck, looks like a dinosaur, and is the size of an elephant, or maybe a hippo at least. That's what people who claim to have seen it say. It should have gone extinct millions of years ago, but this Congo's version of the Loch Ness Monster somehow survived. This creature is the Mokele Mbembe, which means one who stops the flow of rivers, and more folks are saying they've seen it lately. European explorers first heard the stories of this creature from the people living near the Congo River in the early 1900s. A German captain even included a description of the monster in his official report from his expedition. The locals told him the animal was of a brownish-gray color with smooth skin, a very flexible neck, and only one long tooth that could be a horn. Some of them mentioned a long, muscular tail, like that of an alligator. They also said that the creature lived in the caves, but climbed the shores even in the daytime to find some plants to eat. Locals also believed its favorite snack was a kind of liana with large white blossoms. Some of them even showed the German captain some fresh path the monster left leading next to those plants. And they warned him that Mokele Mbembe definitely didn't like humans and took down any canoe that would sail nearby. Dinosaurs were a real hit in pop culture in the 1910s, and several newspapers in Europe and North America wrote about the dino-like monster from Africa back then. In the later years, several expeditions traveled to the Congo Basin to search for Mokele Mbembe or interview claimed witnesses. They did not find any direct physical evidence, but collected many stories. One zoologist in the 1980s said he took a film of Mokele Mbembe, but the footage did not develop properly. Stories and movies like Jurassic Park have kept the dream alive that dinosaurs might still be hiding somewhere in deep forests. At some point, people stopped reporting sightings of the creature as often, so it almost became a forgotten legend. But it all changed recently, as many people claim to have witnessed the mythical monster with their own eyes. Cryptozoologists, those fans of mysterious creatures, believe it could be a dinosaur that, for some reason, didn't go extinct, related to a brachiosaurus or a diplodocus. This idea comes from how people describe seeing the creature, with a super long neck, a huge body, and a tiny head. They think it might have stayed hidden in the deep forests of Africa all this time. But scientists say that if it really were the last living dinosaur, we would have found some real proof by now, like a photo or bones or something showing it walking around the Congo Basin. Some expeditions that are trying to find proof the monster is real have even used sonar technology to scan the murky waters of Central African rivers and lakes in search of any large, unidentified creatures. Some people even narrowed down the monster's location to a specific remote lake, surrounded by untouched jungle in the swamps. So far, the search for evidence hasn't been successful. The explanation behind all the sightings of the Mokele Mbembe could be the changing ecosystem. More and more human settlements are moving into the huge Congo Basin rainforest. People aren't used to seeing large animals that live in the forest, so they believe they have witnessed the mysterious creature from their folklore. The human brain often fills in the gaps in something we don't know and uses imagination to explain it, especially if there's a ready-made version that everyone's heard of. But still, we can't completely rule out the possibility that there are some new, unknown species of animals hiding in the Congo forests. Maybe just not a missing dinosaur. Another legend, this time Mongolian, says there's a giant worm living deep in the Gobi Desert. Yep, similar to the monster you've seen in Dune. The creature, which is supposedly up to 6 feet long, can spit acid that could melt anything and shoot electricity. They say it spends most of its days hiding underneath the sandy dunes, but likes to come out during the wetter months of June and July. The people in the West first found out about the megaworm of the Gobi Desert thanks to an American paleontologist, Roy Chapman Andrews. This brave man was probably the inspiration for Indiana Jones. In 1926, he wrote about the creature in his book. At the meeting with Mongolian leaders, Andrews heard detailed descriptions of the creature, even though none of them had ever seen it themselves. One of them said it looked like a sausage that was about 2 feet long, with no head or legs. According to him, the worm was so poisonous that just touching it could instantly take your life, and it lived in the loneliest parts of the Gobi Desert. Andrews didn't think the creature was real, but he shared these stories again in another book. And then, stories of the monster spread around the world. In some of them, it's only 1 foot long. In others, it's as large as a human. Some say it looks like a snake, and some describe it as a caterpillar. Some people claim it has wings and can fly, and others think it could be a supernatural evil being without a body. The color of the creature also remains a subject of debate. It could be white-gray, brown, or even bright red. The stories of witnesses are probably so different because the creature doesn't even exist. In 1983, one scientist who was visiting the region heard that an old man had managed to finally catch the mysterious worm. He also found out there was a nest nearby and decided to risk it all and see it. But instead of a scary monster, there was a tartar sand boa inside. Luckily for the scientist, this snake is non-venomous, but it does have gray-brown scales and could match the description of the giant worm. When he showed it to the locals, supposedly all of them said it was the monster they had seen. Big expeditions from America, Britain, and New Zealand came to the Gobi Desert to try and find the creature. Many other adventurers came from all around the world on their own, but found no evidence the monster was real. But many Mongolians are sure the death worm is no fantasy. If you don't believe there's a monster in the Gobi Desert, how about one in Lake Worth in Texas? According to local folklore, there's a part human, part goat creature with scales and long clawed fingers hiding there. It all started back in July 1969, when locals claimed to have spotted this mysterious creature roaming around. The newspapers loved the story and started reporting about new sightings. One article said that the monster jumped out of a tree and landed on some guy's car. Another report claimed that the Lake Worth monster decided to throw an automobile tire at a group of people. Someone even managed to take a photo of the creature, and the newspapers published it. Locals started flocking to the lake at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature, but no one could find any evidence it was real after all. The author of the monster's photograph later said it was most likely someone's prank, because the creature really wanted to be seen. Then, a reporter from the local newspaper received an anonymous letter saying that it was 3 high school students who decided to dress up and scare people. Even despite this, some cryptozoologists think it could have been an undiscovered primate species that walks on 2 legs. We don't know if the Worth monster is real, but it does one good thing and brings together the local community. Every year since 2009, they throw the Lake Worth Monster Bash.
Okay, it's pop quiz time. What's the strongest river in the world? The Amazon? Pfft, rookie guess. No, really. The mightiest river isn't on land at all. It's underwater, and it's called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, or ACC for friends. This beast flows with a force 100 times stronger than the Amazon River, and it could power over 100,000 hydroelectric plants. That's enough electricity to light up entire continents. But this underwater juggernaut doesn't just flex its muscles for fun. It's the planet's ultimate multitasker. The ACC is Earth's thermostat, carbon vacuum, climate stabilizer, and oceanic superhighway all rolled into one. But here's the not-so-fun part. Scientists have spotted a serious red flag. The ACC is slowing down. And not just by a little bit. We're talking up to 20% weaker by 2050. If this trend continues, we're looking at climate chaos that could make your worst Monday feel like a day at the spa. So, maybe time to panic a little? Well, hold on. So what is the ACC anyways? To learn more about it, we need to dive deep into the ocean, figuratively. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current is the only ocean current that flows all the way around the planet, hugging the cold continent of Antarctica like a belt of water. Unlike other currents that get tripped up by continents, the ACC has a clear racetrack, nothing but open ocean, so it flows uninterrupted through the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica. It moves an astonishing 3.6 billion cubic feet of water per second. That's so much water we couldn't find anything to compare it to, sorry. The ACC is driven by ferocious westerly winds, moving eastward to connect the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans into one continuous supercurrent. It also plunges into abyssal depths, connecting shallow, intermediate, and deep waters into one giant, swirling blender of oceanic energy. Now, to put it simply, it may be too late for that, but I'll try. The ACC is the glue that is keeping all of our planet together. It plays a starring role in the thermohaline circulation, or global conveyor belt, if you don't want to sound lame. This is the system that redistributes heat, carbon, and nutrients around the globe. To make it all work, the ACC pushes nutrient-rich deep water to the surface in a process called upwelling, feeding plankton, krill, whales, and eventually sushi on your plate. That means if you love seafood or care about ocean food chains at all, you should really start paying attention. Without this nutrient cycling, marine life from the bottom to the top of the food web suffers. Now, here's the cool part. While it's busy playing waiter to the sea, the ACC is also doing our laundry. Well, sort of. It absorbs massive amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and stores it in the deep ocean, locking it away for centuries. Think of it like Earth's giant carbon vault, no password required. It also helps regulate the weather. Without the ACC pushing heat around the globe, Western Europe would be 50 degrees colder. That means Paris would feel like Siberia, and Londoners would have to trade their umbrellas for snowshoes. The current helps maintain the temperature balance between the hemispheres, stabilizing wind patterns, rainfall, and ocean temperatures around the world. Even hurricane patterns could change because warm ocean surfaces are a key ingredient for cyclone formation. Mess with the currents, and you might be dialing up stronger, weirder storms. So, why is it slowing down? Well, of course, the answer is humans. You know those ice caps that are melting? Well, in Antarctica, where our friend the ACC lives, there's so much ice that if all of it melted, the Earth would rise more than 200 feet. That's taller than Cinderella's castle. What's worse, 60% of all the fresh water in the world is frozen in that ice. While that much water melting is already terrifying, it's the freshness of the water that really messes things up. You see, the ACC relies on the Southern Ocean's cold, salty water to be dense and heavy so it can sink, which helps power the current forward like a chain reaction. But when fresh water from melting glaciers pours into the ocean, it dilutes the saltiness. That makes the water less dense, so it stops sinking properly. Without that sink and flush mechanism, the ACC can't maintain its powerful flow. It's like trying to flush a toilet with no gravity. As this continues, fresh water flows north, altering the ocean's density structure and counteracting the effects of ocean warming, which normally would speed the current up. Instead, the ACC slows down. A weaker ACC means less upwelling, so fewer nutrients reach the surface. This could devastate Antarctic marine ecosystems, reducing biodiversity, collapsing fisheries, and threatening species like penguins, whales, and krill. It also opens the door in Antarctica to invasive species, like the southern bull kelp, which could throw entire food chains into chaos. Krill alone are the main food source for whales, seals, penguins, and fish. So when krill populations crash, the whole system begins to wobble like a house of cards in a hurricane. And then there's the feedback loop from hell. As the ACC weakens, more warm water can sneak southward, reaching Antarctica and melting the ice even faster. That melting will dump more fresh water into the ocean, which will weaken the current even more, which will melt more ice, and you get the idea. It's a vicious cycle. Worse still, warm waters underneath ice shelves can cause them to break apart from below, meaning the melting accelerates even when surface temperatures seem stable. Globally, the effects would ripple far and wide. Monsoons in India could become erratic, rainfall in the Amazon could drop, and agriculture from Africa to Asia could suffer. Sea levels along the east coast of North America could surge, and global weather patterns could spin into confusion. Even the Southern Ocean's ability to support commercial fisheries, like Chile's lucrative salmon industry, could decline as nutrients fail to reach the surface. And let's not forget, without a strong ACC, the ocean's ability to absorb carbon and excess heat plummets. That means that more CO2 and heat will stay in the atmosphere, making our lives even more miserable. It's like turning off Earth's air conditioner while cranking up the furnace, and burning down the pantry while you're at it. Of course, this isn't the first time things went south with the ocean currents. Before humans started heating up the planet, Earth went through a deep freeze called the Little Ice Age, and it wasn't just about colder winters. This icy chapter may have kicked off when ocean currents in the North Atlantic started acting weird. And it wasn't so long ago. This Little Ice Age had a peak in 1850, literally yesterday. Scientists believe that melting glaciers and massive exports of Arctic sea ice flooded the ocean with fresh water. That fresh water messed with the ocean's usual saltiness and density, weakening powerful systems like the AMOC, short for Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. That's a mouthful. It's another crucial piece of the global conveyor belt puzzle. As these currents slowed down, less warm water reached the north, sea ice spread farther, and temperatures dropped even more. And here's the spooky part. Records from seashells near Iceland show that this shift didn't happen all at once. It came in two waves, like the planet was struggling to stay stable before tipping into a colder world. And because the AMOC is also part of the crazy life support system of planet Earth, everything is connected. Both systems are influenced by temperature, salinity, and the sinking of cold water. When the ACC slows, it can alter the balance of deep water formation and mixing, potentially weakening the AMOC too. That's a domino effect you really don't want to see. In fact, some models suggest that if both the ACC and AMOC are pushed past their tipping points, the result could be centuries of unstable climate conditions, way beyond anything modern agriculture or infrastructure is built to handle. So, next time you're sipping a cold drink or enjoying sushi, maybe raise a toast to the mighty ACC. It's doing a lot more for you than you think, and it could really use a little appreciation and less ice melting, please.
About 14,000 years ago, some super skilled builders from another planet landed on Earth. Their mission was to help build a massive stone complex with perfectly interlocking blocks. They used some advanced technology, centuries ahead of their time, and once the job was done, they disappeared without a trace. This is not a sci-fi plot, but one of the theories trying to explain the mystery of Puma Punku. Scientists don't officially accept it, but they still don't know for sure how, when, and who built this impressive construction. Puma Punku is part of the ancient city of Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. Tiwanaku is an important place in Inca traditions. They believed it to be the place where the world was created. Historians believe Puma Punku was built around 536 AD. The first Europeans discovered it in the middle of the 16th century. At the heart of Puma Punku, there is a huge, terraced platform filled with massive stone blocks, some as big as a school bus. The largest one weighs a jaw-dropping 131 tons. That's heavier than 20 elephants. Even the smaller rocks are as big as a couch. Archaeologists believe there were at least 5 big gateways, as well as several smaller ones that may have been part of a grand monument. The site is built using 2 types of stone, red sandstone and andesite, which is one of the hardest rocks on Earth. The 8-shaped blocks of the construction fit together like puzzle pieces. They all look the same, as if they were mass-produced in a factory. But that should have been impossible for an ancient civilization. Even the smaller rocks are as big as a couch. These blocks were carved with precise holes and grooves to fit together. Builders made perfectly straight lines, cut identical angles, created smooth surfaces, and drilled holes. Some scientists believe they may have used advanced techniques, but there's no record of the tools they used. It took another 1,000 years before other civilizations could match this level of precision. One of the biggest mysteries is how these enormous stones were transported. Puma Punku sits high up in the mountains at 12,600 feet above sea level. So high that even trees don't grow there. The builders didn't have wheels, cranes, or modern machines, yet somehow they moved these heavy blocks miles from their original locations. Some scientists think they used llama skin ropes and ramps, but no one really knows for sure. The most commonly accepted version is that the Tiwanaku civilization, which thrived in the region between 500 and 1000 CE, built this impressive site. The complex was enormous and had many different areas. A western court, a large open area in the center, and an eastern court that was surrounded by walls. Long ago, it must have been incredibly beautiful, with polished metal plaques shimmering in the sunlight, brightly colored fabrics and ceramics decorating the buildings, and people in elaborate costumes walking through the plaza. But something doesn't add up here, as the Tiwanaku people never wrote down how they built Puma Punku. They would have probably left some clues if they had accomplished something like this. Plus, the Tiwanaku people didn't have the high-tech equipment needed to carve and move giant stone blocks with perfect precision. The architectural historians who first studied the place professionally concluded that a hammerstone couldn't have done such a fine job. They found no metal tools that were used in the construction process. That's why they suggested they might have used some unconventional tools the historians didn't even recognize as tools. There's a theory that these ancient builders might have had a way to soften stone to make it easy to carve before it hardened again. Or maybe they poured liquid stone into molds, just like we make concrete today. If it's true, this would mean an advanced civilization existed in South America long before we thought. Some researchers even think it had to do with the theory of Atlantis or other lost civilizations that may have had immense knowledge before a global catastrophe wiped them out. Local legends say that powerful deities used incredible powers to lift and shape the massive stone blocks. And some people believe Pumapunku was so advanced that the builders must have had help from visitors from outer space. The perfect cuts and massive stones look like something from modern construction. The supporters of this theory also say that some carvings at Tiwanaku show figures wearing helmet-like shapes, so they could be left by space travelers. Scientists from the University of California, Los Angeles, decided to officially debunk this theory. They created a digital model of Pumapunku using super precise measurements from historical records. Then, they used a 3D printer to make a miniature version of the site at 4% of its original size. Once the pieces were printed, the team sorted them by size, shape, and design, like a giant puzzle. They noticed that some blocks had special grooves for holding metal clamps, and others had ornamental carvings. When they finished their model, they realized one of the buildings had a very familiar design. It looked just like structures from two nearby sites. This was solid proof that Pumapunku was built by humans, not visitors from outer space. Over the centuries, people stole stones from Pumapunku and moved them around. This made things even more confusing for archaeologists. UCLA team created a digital archive, so researchers all over the world can now study the site without traveling to Bolivia. So maybe we'll hear about the new twists in this mystery soon. Another construction from the past that still impresses us with extreme precision is the Serapeum of Saqqara, a burial place built around 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. A French scientist accidentally discovered it in 1850. Inside the Serapeum, he found a long underground hallway. On both sides of the hallway, there were giant stone rooms, and inside those rooms, there were huge granite sarcophagi. These sarcophagi were not built for people, but for the sacred Apis bulls. These bulls were treated like royalty, as the people believed they were chosen by deities. The Egyptians believed these bulls were the incarnations of the deity Ptah and had magical powers to protect their kingdom. Some of the stone boxes inside the Serapeum weighed around 70 tons. They were made with perfectly straight angles and smooth surfaces. Scientists noted roller marks on the floor and found wooden winches with levers, which the Egyptians likely used to move the sarcophagi. Since the burial chambers were lower than the hallway floor, workers filled them with sand, rolled the sarcophagus into place, and then slowly removed the sand to lower it perfectly into position. A stone inscription found in the Serapeum said it took 28 days just to move one of these stone boxes. Even though these sarcophagi were meant for bulls, they were way bigger than needed. Pharaohs, who were the rulers of Egypt, were buried in tiny coffins. So it's really weird that these boxes were so enormous. Another question is why they used granite, which is so hard to carve, instead of limestone. Some people believe the stone boxes weren't just tombs. They might have been ancient energy generators. The Egyptians knew about fermentation. If someone placed food or meat inside a perfectly sealed granite box and let fermentation happen, pressure would build up inside. Granite contains quartz, a special crystal that creates electricity when squeezed. As pressure increased, the box's lid could pop open, releasing gas. Ancient drawings found in the Serapeum show stones stacked on top of the boxes, which might have been used to make the lids even heavier and help produce more electricity. Thousands of years later, when explorers opened these boxes, they only found bull bones, maybe because all the organic material had disappeared over time. Scientists still aren't sure if the massive stone boxes were actually ancient energy systems, so the mystery lives on.
Consider South America and Africa. Don't they kind of look like they fit together, like puzzle pieces? Well, they actually did. But about 130 million years ago, South America was like, bye, and slowly started drifting away. These days, it's around 1,800 miles from Africa, and it's still on the move. Every year, the continent shifts a little more toward the Pacific Ocean. So, how's that even happening? Tectonic plates are constantly moving. That's what makes the Earth's surface shift over time, going from this to what we see today. But those movements happen so slowly that you and I can't see them go. So, no, Brazilians or Chileans aren't out there feeling their continent inching westward. But the numbers don't lie. South America is moving, and apparently all it wants is to get as far away as possible from this massive underwater mountain range called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. But what exactly is pushing the land toward the Pacific Ocean? It is the heat inside our planet. Way down beneath the ocean, there are cracks in the Earth's crust, and magma, super hot melted rock, rises up through those cracks. When that happens, the magma cools and hardens into solid rock. Over time, this process might build underwater mountains, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And as more new crust forms, it begins to push the older crust out of the way. In the process, tectonic plates and the continents riding on top of them get pushed along. Now, on the other side of South America, over by the Pacific, there is the Nazca Plate. It's heavier and it's moving eastward. Since it is denser, it is sliding underneath the South American Plate. This entire process is called subduction, and it's happening at a rate of about 3 inches per year. By the way, the collision between these two plates is what's behind all those breathtaking volcanoes scattered throughout the Andes, and it's also making the continent move. So, if everything goes according to plan, projections show that South America will end up more centered in the Pacific Ocean in the future. But some models suggest something way crazier. Before we get into that, though, we need to clear something up. Why on earth isn't Africa following in South America's footsteps? I mean, shouldn't it be drifting west too? Well, not quite. Africa is doing its own thing because it sits on the African Plate. So the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is located between those two continents, and just like it pushes the South American Plate, it also pushes the African Plate, but in the opposite direction. It's like this ridge is trying to split up two ex-besties, But there's more. Africa is also being influenced by the East African Rift. That's one of those massive cracks we talked about earlier, but it's happening on land, which makes it extra dramatic. This is what's causing the continent to slowly split apart. It's a long story, but let's just say the rift is pulling Africa in more directions than South America ever had to deal with. Okay, now it is finally time to talk about that crazier thing that might happen to South America and everything around it in the future. Theory number 1. It could break away from North America. I know, super dramatic, but don't panic. We're talking hundreds of millions of years from now, and I won't be around. You see, both continents are moving in the same general direction, but at different speeds. The North American Plate is cruising along at about 1 inch per year, while South America is moving a bit faster. So even though they're heading the same way, they are not keeping pace. Over time, as the Atlantic Ocean continues to widen and the Pacific keeps shrinking, all this tectonic movement could eventually pull the Americas apart. Theory number 2. Marine life could go through some major changes. Right now, the Americas act as kind of a giant wall between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Because of that, sea animals have evolved differently on each side. Take the green sea turtle, for example. The ones living in the Atlantic tend to be bigger and lighter in color. Meanwhile, their Pacific cousins are usually smaller and darker. But if, one day, there is no land blocking these two populations from mixing, they would end up with brand new migration routes, new nesting spots, and a lot more overlap in their territories. Now, multiply that scenario by hundreds of other species, and things could really get shaken up. We're talking about new interactions, unexpected competition, and maybe even the rise of entirely new species. Alright, theory number 3. America might meet Africa again. Right now, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is busy creating a new seafloor, and because of that, the Atlantic Ocean is slowly getting wider. But in about 125 million years, scientists believe that process could come to a stop. Instead of the seafloor spreading apart, the ocean floor might start getting pulled under the continents. When that happens, the Atlantic will stop growing and start shrinking. And the water section between South America and Africa is likely to be the first part pulled beneath the land. That means the Americas and Africa could meet again. And when that happens, border countries could turn into super shaky places, with earthquakes happening all the time and brand new volcanoes popping up left and right. The eastern United States would no longer be known for the peaceful green slopes of the Appalachians, but for snow-covered giants that occasionally spew lava and ash, more like the Cascade Range out west. Countries would end up with totally new neighbors. Brazil might line up with Nigeria and Cameroon. Uruguay could be sitting right next to Angola, and Argentina might be sharing a border with South Africa. So if these two continents really do merge, how intense would that be? Well, for starters, this new supercontinent would instantly become the biggest one on Earth, about 1.5 times the size of Asia. And chances are, a brand new mountain range would form right where the continents meet, creating a natural border between nations. Being part of the same massive continent could make a lot of things way easier. For one, tourism could totally take off. People traveling between countries by land without needing pricey plane tickets could be a game changer. But it wouldn't stop there. Other types of economic activity could get a major boost too. Now on one side we have South America, which already produces and sells a wide variety of foods, from wheat to bananas, beef, cocoa, soybeans, hey, you name it. On the other side, there is Africa, exporting things like textiles and clothing. That alone would make them a super powerful bloc when it comes to trading raw goods. But can you name another important thing these two continents have in common? Yep, petroleum. Countries in South America, like Brazil, Venezuela, and Colombia, are major oil exporters. And over in Africa, you've got Nigeria, Algeria, and Libya doing the same. Now, can you see just how powerful that kind of union could be? Meanwhile, let's talk about animals. These two massive lands coming together could lead us to wild meetups, like a capybara sharing space with a Nile crocodile, or a sloth seeing a hyena from the top of a tree. This could even lead to new animal hybrids showing up, like a tabby crocodile or a sloth hyena. Okay, those weren't the cleverest names, and honestly, these animals wouldn't be able to mate or even wouldn't want to. But you get the point, right? It's not all positive, unfortunately. New species showing up could become predators, competitors, or even parasites to the native plants and animals. It would take a long time for things to settle into a new balance in those border regions. But honestly, no one really knows how long it would take. The only thing I do know is neither of us will be around to see it, which is okay.
On March 24th, European skies were dominated by a glowing, insane blue spiral. The eerie sight kept growing, expanding, almost like the whole Earth was about to get sucked into a vortex. And after a couple of minutes, poof, it suddenly disappeared. Even though it looked like some kind of extraterrestrial tech, there's actually a very human explanation behind it. Photos of this strange swirl started popping up all over Europe, with people sharing them from countries like the United Kingdom, France, Norway, and Germany. But if we really want to figure out what happened, we have to look all the way over to the United States. Turns out, on that same day, SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket was launched from Florida at around 1:50 in the afternoon local time. So while most people in the US saw clear skies after the launch, it actually caused that strange anomaly in the European skies. And that happened because Falcon 9 is a reusable rocket. So, after launching into space, it releases what is called its payload. And by that, I mean whatever it is carrying, like a satellite. After completing its mission, the rocket itself turns back toward Earth. As it does, it ejects any leftover fuel, which instantly freezes due to the high altitude, forming a spiral pattern because of the rocket's movement. Light then reflects off the frozen fuel, making it visible from Earth. Basically, that's what the blue spiral was: leftover fuel released by the rocket in space. So, should we be worried down here on the ground? I mean, is it dangerous? Well, no. It's not like it was some kind of spacecraft accident. It's just leftovers and light. And this is totally normal for the Falcon 9 rocket. Even though it went viral this time, the same phenomenon was spotted about 4 years ago. Back then, people speculated all kinds of things, like a swirling galaxy moving across the sky, or even an unidentified, unexplained flying object. But nah, it was just one of Elon Musk's space toys. Speaking of which, his space agency is also behind another eerie sighting that's becoming more common. On clear nights, many people have reported seeing a strange string of lights moving quickly in a straight line, almost like a train of stars. Those aren't drones, and they're definitely not perfectly organized shooting stars. These strange lights are actually Starlink satellites from SpaceX. You know, that project that beams high-speed internet from space using thousands of tiny satellites, basically turning the entire planet into a giant Wi-Fi zone. But wait, satellites don't have lights on them. So how is it possible that they look so bright at night? Well, basically, what we're seeing is the sun reflecting off the satellites as they travel through their lowest orbit. And they're only visible if the sky isn't too bright. What's really impressive is that you can see this same event more than once on the same day. That's because Starlink satellites travel at a staggering speed of 300 miles per minute, and they complete one full orbit of Earth every 90 minutes. So, doing the math, that means you could spot those satellites within 2 hours of a previous sighting. Without a doubt, the beginning of the year was busy for skywatchers in the United States. In February, they got to see this stunning cloudy jellyfish shape taking over the sky. What do you think it is? If you guessed another thing related to SpaceX, you're right. This is another art created by a Falcon 9 rocket. This time, it happened because the rocket was launched during the evening twilight. The light from the setting sun bounces off the rocket's smoke trail, creating this amazing effect. Now, let's move on to Italy, where another creepy event occurred. It was a stormy night, and suddenly, way up in the sky, a giant glowing red ring flashed for just a split second. Nope, it was not an extraterrestrial portal. This is something called an ELV. This happens when a powerful lightning strike sends out an electromagnetic pulse that hits the ionosphere, which is a super high up layer of our atmosphere. When this happens, nitrogen atoms up there get excited and glow red, creating a massive but super quick light show. Another red phenomenon happened in Scandinavia, but instead of a ring, it was more like a streak of light. This is known as a stable auroral red arc, or SAR. Despite the name, it's not an aurora. It's something much rarer. This phenomenon happens when the Earth's magnetic field, which acts like a big protective shield, gets disturbed. This disturbance causes some gas in the atmosphere to get super hot, thanks to a huge electrical current around the planet. What's weird is that only oxygen gets heated up during a SAR, which is why these light shows always glow that same red color. And fun fact, this event is more likely to happen after a big solar storm weakens Earth's magnetic field. It is impressive to see phenomena like this with the naked eye, but the view from outside Earth can be just as stunning. In 2022, an astronaut aboard the International Space Station spotted two bizarre blue blobs of light glimmering in our planet's atmosphere. They happened at the same time, but they weren't related at all. One of them was a massive lightning strike that hit right next to a large circular gap in the clouds. The lightning lit up the surrounding cloud walls, creating a glowing ring around the hole. Another one was caused by the moon. The way the moon was positioned made the sunlight it reflected pass through Earth's atmosphere, creating a bright blue blob with a fuzzy ring around it. And if you're wondering what that weird orange halo is, running parallel to the curvature of the Earth, I've got you. That's the edge of the atmosphere, also known as Earth's limb. And this is what it looks like when viewed from the International Space Station. In Canada, residents of central Alberta were looking up at the sky one night when they suddenly saw something strange. A bunch of vertical beams of light that seemed to be coming from the ground and reaching up into the blackness of space. It sure looked like something out of a science fiction movie, but this is actually just an optical illusion. Yep, it's a visual trick caused by some specific winter conditions. This phenomenon happens when light is refracted by ice crystals. Here's what's going on. When it's freezing outside, tiny ice crystals form in the air. These crystals are super thin and flat, so each one acts like a tiny mirror that reflects light sources positioned below it. Basically, the crystals reflect the light straight up, creating those glowing vertical beams. And it can be caused by any light source, like the sun or the moon. But in most cases, the sources of these light pillars is man-made, like car headlights or streetlights. Even though the phenomenon is completely natural, it rarely happens, and only in very specific situations. First, it has to be freezing cold. On that particular day in central Alberta, for example, the temperature was around minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, the weather has to be calm, with no wind at all. If a storm breaks out, forget it. You won't be able to see the light pillars. And don't mix them up with auroras, okay? Auroras are mostly seen in high-latitude regions, like around the Arctic and Antarctic. Since they happen way up in the atmosphere, they're visible over large areas. Light pillars, on the other hand, are more localized and concentrated in a much smaller area. But hey, no matter which one you spot, if you're lucky enough to see one of these amazing sights in the sky, you're in for a show you won't forget.
Wow! Scientists have found a lost city beneath Egypt's pyramids. And it's incredibly large, bigger than the biggest target you can imagine. Underground chambers, passageways, and vertical structures. Scientists have no idea what purposes they serve. But let's start from the very beginning. Italian and Scottish scientists studying the Pyramid of Khafra discovered something that looked like secret tunnels under 3 pyramids. This find might change what we know about ancient Egypt. The expedition, called the Khafra Project, was led by Corrado Malunga from Pisa, Italy, and Filippo Biondi from the University of Strathclyde, Scotland. Their mission was to focus on exploring Khafra's pyramid, the second largest on the Giza Plateau. Scientists uncovered a massive structure beneath the Pyramid of Khafra. Could it be an ancient Egyptian underground city? The experts analyzed the data they had and came to the conclusion that 8 large vertical structures could be hiding beneath, possibly wells or shafts. They extend a staggering 6,500 feet across. Imagine placing 2.5 Burj Khalifas on the ground, one after another, and you get the sheer size of this find. These shafts also plunge nearly 2,000 feet underground. Some of the deepest underground stations in the world are located at a mere 380 feet underground or so. These cylindrical shafts are surrounded by spiral paths. Picture some old Gothic castle. They're connected to 2 giant, weirdly shaped chambers. Are those cubes? Or possibly bowls? Each of these chambers is likely more than 260 feet across. Now, even though we know about the structures now, no one has figured out their original purpose yet. Want to hear something even more shocking? Okay then. The team is almost sure that similar access points can be found under all 3 pyramids. In other words, all of them might be linked by a hidden system of underground tunnels, chambers, and passages. Even deeper, about 4,000 feet under the surface, there might be more unknown structures. And doesn't it add to the mystery? But the coolest news is that, according to some team members, these hidden structures near Giza pyramids could align with the legendary Halls of Amenti. In ancient Egyptian mythology, it's a place where people are believed to arrive when they're close to the end of their days. There, they are said to take a 3-day-long trial, facing their biggest fears. Now, how did scientists even discover these hidden spaces? To uncover them, researchers used 2 satellites positioned 420 miles above Earth. They sent radar signals to the Giza Plateau, and these signals generated detailed images, which were later compiled into a 3D model of the underground layout, including the newly detected shafts. Then, using synthetic aperture radar or SAR technology, which is a type of radar that can penetrate through stone, the team also spotted 5 small room-like structures hidden deep within the pyramid. One of these chambers contained a sarcophagus, which was once thought to be the tomb of Pharaoh Khafre. But now, scientists believe this was a mistake. The true burial site is likely to be elsewhere. In any case, these 5 hidden rooms were completely unknown before the scans. They seem to be arranged in the center of the pyramid and are linked to underground pathways leading somewhere below the structure. There's an opinion that these tunnels could lead to more hidden chambers and wells. Some of them might be around 4,500 years old. Wow! What if they help us solve ancient civilization mysteries? Preliminary data suggests that all this underground space can be much more than a few empty chambers. There might be many more hidden structures near the Giza pyramids. How come? Well, the thing is, the structure appears to include hollowed-out sections with spiral pathways leading even deeper underground. Refining the images hinting at this could reveal an extensive subterranean network. It might be a whole city hidden under the surface. Now, despite the excitement surrounding these findings, there are also a lot of people who don't believe in the existence of the underground city. They're skeptical about the archaeological discovery in Egypt due to the lack of peer-reviewed verification. That's why several archaeologists and radar experts have challenged the validity of the claims. They've explained that the technology used to make the discovery may not be advanced enough to produce such detailed underground imagery. According to them, the 5 smaller chambers found near the surface could be natural formations, since the area had had sacred significance long before the construction of the pyramids. Some experts have even dismissed the use of radar methods in this context altogether. They call these methods scientifically unproven and question their accuracy. The discovery has also reignited discussions about ancient Egyptian myths and the possibility of hidden texts lying somewhere beneath the Giza pyramids. The layout of the newly detected underground chambers shares similarities with mythological accounts of the Hall of Records, a rumored chamber that could preserve early Egyptian wisdom. If confirmed, these findings could significantly reshape the understanding of Egypt's sacred topography. Plus, this lost city beneath Egypt's pyramid could become physical evidence of previously unknown underground structures. That's why the Khafre project is super eager to begin excavating to confirm their findings. But getting approval from Egyptian authorities is a challenging process. The discoveries still need to undergo peer review before they are accepted by the academic community. By the way, this recent archaeological discovery in Egypt comes on the heels of another discovery involving a weird structure beneath the Royal Giza Cemetery, which researchers believe is unnatural in origin. Archaeologists used remote sensing techniques and uncovered a mysterious L-shaped structure underground in the Western Cemetery of Giza. This area is known to house burials of royal family members and high-ranking officials. Many of the tombs in the cemetery have above-ground mastabas, rectangular stone or mud brick structures with flat roofs. But there is an area in the center of the cemetery where there are no above-ground structures. To investigate this unexplored region, the team used electrical resistive tomography and ground-penetrating radar. ERT works by sending electrical currents into the ground and measuring the resistance to detect remains. As for GPR, it sends radar into the ground and maps the structures based on the radar's return. The team found an anomaly about 6.5 feet beneath the surface. It appeared to be an L-shaped structure measuring at least 33 feet in length. The readings suggested that the structure had been backfilled with sand after its construction. This made the team hypothesize that it could be a mix of sand and gravel, or possibly an air void. This anomaly was classified as a highly resistive structure, which meant it didn't occur naturally. Motoyuki Sato, the study's lead author and professor at Tohoku University in Japan, claims that the structure is not a natural formation due to its sharp shape. Another weird thing about ancient Egyptian pyramids is that historians have long believed that they were built primarily for royals and high-status individuals who had the wealth and power to create such massive structures. However, new research from the archaeological site of Tombos in modern-day Sudan challenges this assumption. The thing is, Tombos' pyramid may have served as burial sites for low-status workers as well as elites. The hard-working members of ancient communities may have found their last resting place in some of the most visible monuments, including the pyramids. Located along the Nile River in the ancient region of Nubia, Tombos became part of Egypt after its conquest of the area around 1400 BCE. That's when Egypt established the site to strengthen its colonial control. Workers at Tombos built pyramids, but those were much more modest than the famous pyramids of Giza. The research team reanalyzed 110 human skeletons from Tombos, originally studied in 2012. In particular, they examined the entheses, the areas where tendons and ligaments attach to bones. Such an analysis can give us insights into the amount of physical labor a person performed. When someone does hard labor, their bones often develop distinct crests and ridges at these attachment points due to the stress on the tendons and ligaments. And while some skeletons showed little change in their entheses, suggesting they belonged to individuals from the upper classes, others showed more serious changes. It means they belonged to lower-class workers. This finding can totally challenge our earlier understanding of pyramid burials, especially the idea that only elites were buried in the pyramids, because the pyramids themselves were designed for the elite. This recent research may prove that lower-class workers may have found their final resting place in these monumental structures too.
In 2020, strange signals from deep beneath Antarctica sent shockwaves through the news. Within days, headlines exploded. NASA had found a parallel universe where time runs in reverse. But what really happened? And what did scientists actually detect? Well, this story is a case of madness, misunderstood experiments, and the human need to believe in mystery. Even today, every few months, someone reposts a headline screaming that NASA found a parallel universe in Antarctica. A universe where time flows backwards, and people believe it. But no, NASA didn't find a mirror world under the South Pole, or some sort of a backwards reality where people age in reverse or speak in rewound sentences. They did find something curious, though. Here's what actually went down. Scientists were flying a strange-looking instrument over Antarctica called ANITA, short for Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna. ANITA is a machine that floats over Antarctica, basically a giant balloon with antennas. It listens for tiny space particles called neutrinos. Neutrinos are super small and ghost-like. They have almost no weight and go through stuff like it's not even there, even entire planets. Usually, these neutrinos come from space and rain on Earth from above. Most neutrinos, the common low-energy ones, just fly right through the Earth like it's air. They're like tiny bugs flying through a chain-link fence. There are some very high-energy neutrinos, though. They're super rare and they interact a bit more often with matter, and they can get blocked. If high-energy neutrinos hit something dense enough, like the rock and metal inside Earth, they might finally bump into a particle and get absorbed. That's more like fast tennis balls that hit the fence once in a while. Low-energy neutrinos, which are everywhere and pretty harmless, are pretty undetectable. But these high-energy guys are exactly what ANITA can detect. When they slam into ice, they send some radio waves that are easy to listen to. This faint radio signal is called the Askaryan effect. And yep, that's exactly why ANITA is flying over Antarctica. That's because the ice is pure, dry, and quiet. It's perfect for catching those rare signals. So, what did ANITA detect? It detected something rising up from below the ice, like a high-energy neutrino coming from the Earth. What? Okay, let's think logically. Maybe it started somewhere in the north, traveled all the way through the Earth, and popped out the other side. Still, that's super weird. That's not supposed to happen. Neutrinos with that much energy should have been stopped inside the planet. Like we said, get absorbed. So, scientists caught a little bit of a brain bug. That shouldn't be possible with our current physics, unless something we don't understand is going on. And when you're faced with something bizarre, you explore all options, even the wildest ones. The nightmare began. A group of researchers published a paper suggesting that this strange signal might make sense in a CPT symmetric universe. CPT stands for charge, parity, and time. These are basically three ways to flip the universe. Charge means swap all particles to their opposites. For example, swap electrons, the guys with the negative charge, with positrons, their antimatter twins with the positive charge. Parity means mirror the universe, literally like looking at it through the mirror. Left becomes right, and right becomes left. And time, of course, means run time backward, like rewinding a video. Now, there's a big rule in physics called CPT symmetry. It says that if you change all three of those things at once, the laws of physics should still work the same. This is kind of insane, but if you took the entire universe and swapped matter with antimatter, mirrored it, and reversed time, it would still follow the same physics. Why is that? Well, in our universe, an electron bumps into a positron, and they annihilate into photons. Cool! Now take that, mirror everything, and what do you get? Well, photons spontaneously turn into a positron and an electron, but mirrored and reversed. It's still the same physics, even if it's backwards. The equations still check out, so nature thinks this is valid. So here came the crazy part. Some physicists thought, what if the Big Bang created two universes? One is ours, made of normal matter going forward in time. The other is a mirror twin, made of antimatter, going backward in time from our perspective. This doesn't mean that someone in the other universe feels time going backward. To them, time flows forward, just like it does for us. But from our point of view, they're moving from our future toward our past. And vice versa. To them, we're weirdos who move backwards. And if both universes are exact CPT mirror images of each other, that would mean same physics, same rules, just symmetrical. Same rules, just symmetrical. This isn't some crazy sci-fi theory, even if it sounds like it. It helps explain weird physics mysteries. For example, why there's so much matter in our universe, but not much antimatter, even though they were supposed to be created in equal proportions. Or why the universe is so symmetrical and balanced in some strange ways. So, coming back to the neutrinos, some scientists suggested that maybe those upward-flying particles could be coming from that CPT mirror universe, poking through into ours, like a crack between two symmetrical realities. And if you look at it like that, this is quite a wild take. It's speculative. It's not proven. It's more of a cool thought, but the media immediately blew up. They ran a piece with a headline that said we found proof of a parallel universe going backwards in time in Antarctica. And all the other big tabloids picked it up. They made it sound like NASA had actually found a parallel universe. Time travel is real. Multiverse is confirmed. Meanwhile, people who worked directly on Anita immediately caught brain damage. They tried to jump in to say that's not what happened at all. They explained that the signals were unusual, yes, but there were plenty of normal explanations that didn't require rewriting the laws of physics. It could even be just an experimental error. Maybe an unusual particle behavior or gaps in how we model neutrino interactions. Of course, no one listens to experts about what experts discovered. And once an idea like that hits social media, it becomes nearly impossible to put back in the box. But that also doesn't mean that the multiverse definitely isn't real. Far from it. Physicists are still exploring the concept and assume that some of those potential universes, if they exist, could have different laws of physics. One idea, called the many worlds theory, comes from quantum physics. It says that every time something can happen in more than one way, like a particle moving or a decision being made, all those possibilities actually happen, but in separate universes. So there could be endless versions of reality, each slightly different, branching off from every event. Maybe in one universe, dinosaurs never went extinct. Maybe in another, you never sent that embarrassing text. Another theory is called the bubble universe theory. After the Big Bang, the universe expanded incredibly fast in a process called inflation. Some scientists think that inflation never fully stopped and is still happening in some regions. That would mean new bubble universes are constantly forming, each with its own version of physics. Our universe would just be one bubble in a giant cosmic sea of others. The third idea is about shadow matter. Dark matter is invisible, but its gravity affects the universe. Some scientists think it could be made of particles similar to the ones that make up regular matter, but they're just hidden from us. This mirror, or shadow matter, could form entire invisible galaxies and even life, all existing right alongside us. Maybe we just can't detect it in any way except through gravity for now. But in physics, all of those are just theories, mathematical possibilities. We have no direct evidence that it's real. If we ever find one, though, let's now hope it won't be the boy who cried wolf scenario.
On a fine summer night of August 30th, 1892, a shipping magnate took his family for a cruise on Lake Superior. They were traveling on the Western Reserve, which was supposed to be one of the safest ships of its day. It was made of a type of steel like that used to construct the infamous Titanic, and it ended up with a similar tragic destiny. The ship broke in two and was found only 132 years later, in 2024. The 300-foot steamship was the first steel-plated freighter on the Great Lakes. One newspaper called it the Inland Greyhound because of how quickly it cut through the water. Peter H. Minch was the owner and inventor of this vehicle, which had been built just 2 years earlier in Cleveland. On the night of its last voyage, the ship set off toward Two Harbors, Minnesota. Minch brought along 5 of his family members: his wife, their 2 kids, his sister-in-law, and his niece. There were also 22 crew members aboard. It was a pleasant and smooth ride while they were sailing across Lake Huron. But as soon as they left Whitefish Bay, the lake turned wild, and the crew had to drop anchor for a while. Later that evening, as they entered Lake Superior around 9 p.m., a fierce summer storm moved in with powerful winds and crashing waves. Then disaster. The ship began to split in two. Within just 10 minutes, the Western Reserve was completely underwater. Everyone managed to get into lifeboats. The Minch family, with some crew members, took the wooden one, and the remaining 10 people got into the metal one. But the storm was so brutal that the metal boats sank right away, and only a few made it into the other lifeboat. That second boat floated for the next 10 hours. A steamship passed by, but didn't notice or hear the people calling for help. Around 7 o'clock the next morning, the lifeboat got within a mile of shore near Deer Park, Michigan. They were so close to safety, but sadly, the lifeboat flipped too, and they all ended up in the freezing water. The only survivor of this tragedy was 24-year-old Harry Stewart, the ship's wheelsman. He swam a full mile through the freezing water and made it to shore, almost unconscious but alive. He later mentioned he survived only thanks to a heavy-knit, close-fitting pea jacket. The Western Reserve was lost for over 100 years until a couple of determined explorers finally tracked it down. They spent over 2 years searching non-stop for the wreck off Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Daryl and Dan Ertl found it using a side-scan sonar that looks half a mile out on each side. One day, they saw a tiny blip on the left side of the scan. It was small, but Daryl measured the shadow, noticed that it was about 40 feet tall, and realized it must be something important. So they turned back and scanned directly over the spot. They saw cargo hatches and the wreck that looked like the ship had snapped in two, with one half lying on top of the other in an almost impossible position. Each piece measured around 150 feet long, and once they checked the width, they knew for sure that they had just found the legendary Western Reserve. Historians are still not sure why the vessel, that was supposed to be unsinkable, suddenly snapped in half, but they have a few solid theories. One idea is something called hogging. It happens when the ship rides up over a giant wave and the bow and stern are left hanging in the air with nothing underneath to support them. That puts a large amount of pressure on the middle, and it bends down like a stick when you're pulling both ends. Another plausible reason concerns the steel the vessel was made of. Back then, steel was the hot new substitute for iron. But quality control wasn't perfect. Some steel plates weren't made very well, which could have caused a serious weak point in the ship's body. There's also the chance that the ship didn't have enough ballast, which is the weight used to keep it stable, or maybe it wasn't balanced correctly. Sadly, just 8 weeks after the Western Reserve tragedy, another vessel that had been built at the same time with similar mill runs of steel plate repeated the destiny of its twin. The W.H. Gilcher was a steam freighter used to transport cargo between ports on the Great Lakes. It set out on what was supposed to be a routine trip on October 26, 1892. Loaded with over 3,000 tons of coal, the ship left Buffalo heading for Milwaukee. Captain Leeds H. Weeks and a crew of 18 were on board. Everything seemed normal at first, and by the afternoon of October 28th, the ship passed through the Straits of Mackinac and entered Lake Michigan. It was expected to reach Milwaukee by the 30th, but it never made it. A massive storm slammed into Lake Michigan and Lake Huron on October 28th and 29th, and created havoc on travel plans for many ships. When the storm finally passed and boats started pulling into port, people began to piece together what happened to the W.H. Gilcher. One captain who was sailing nearby on his schooner said he saw a large steamer battling the storm about 20 miles northwest of North Manitou Island around 8 p.m. on the 28th. The ship looked helpless, and there was no movement or sign of life. Another captain later saw furniture and parts of the ship's bridge floating in the lake near South Manitou Island. Then 2 more steamers picked up broken pieces of W.H. Gilcher's pilot house in the same area. It became clear that the storm had destroyed the freighter, and tragically, no one survived. The Great Lakes are a hot spot for shipwrecks, and there have been between 6,000 to 10,000 of those starting in the 17th century. Back in 1679, the Griffon became the first European vessel to vanish without a trace on the lakes. It sailed all the way from Buffalo, New York, to Green Bay, Wisconsin, passing through Lake Erie, the Detroit River, Lake St. Clair, and Lake Huron before reaching Lake Michigan. After a stop in Green Bay, it started heading back, and then it was never seen again. In 1975, one of the most famous shipwrecks happened when the massive 729-foot ore carrier SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior. A fall storm was supposed to stay far south of their route, but things changed fast. Another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, was following behind and kept in radio contact with the Fitz's captain, Ernest McSorley. By the afternoon of November 10th, waves were smashing over the deck, and wind gusts at over 80 miles per hour were hitting both ships hard. By 7:20 p.m., the Anderson couldn't reach the Fitzgerald by radio anymore, and it had vanished from radar. There was no distress call, no warning. The huge ship had just disappeared. Later, search crews found the wreck over 530 feet under the surface, broken into two giant pieces. No one of the 29 crew members survived, and no one witnessed what really happened. There could be all sorts of reasons for such tragedies, from errors in judgment and equipment failure to simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Great Lakes are massive bodies of water with weather systems that you would expect to find in seas. These inland seas sit deep in the middle of the continent, and hurricane-strength winds and powerful storms form here. Many of them hit in November and December, when the waters are still warm from the summer, but Canadian cold air is starting to push down. There's a huge difference in temperature between the air and water. This difference and strong winds lead to massive waves. Plus, ice forms more easily in fresh water than in salt water. It builds up on ships quickly, and crew members also have to get around tricky ice waters. Water levels here are also unstable. In wet years, storms are more likely to happen, and this makes the risk of damage or disaster higher.
Whoa! It's a huge flying island right above your head. In the era of AI, you may think it's nothing but a neural network video, but let me tell you that first, it's very much real. Two, if you want, you can as well visit it. It may even hold the key to the El Dorado secret. This place is called Roraima, and it's actually not an island at all. It's a mountain. Due to a number of factors, we get this vision of an island floating somewhere above us. But it's all about the flat top this mountain has. There's no standard peak, so it looks flat, and the thick clouds get blended into the skies, thus creating this optical illusion. Despite the advancements in satellite technology and affordable air travel, there are still few places on Earth that feel truly uncharted. Like Mount Roraima is one of them. It's been around for almost 2 billion years, and it's one of the oldest formations on our planet. For comparison, dinosaurs appeared somewhere around 240 million years ago. Some scientists believe that this area used to be a part of the supercontinent called Gondwanaland. And back then, it wasn't yet a mountain. When the supercontinent split apart, the erosion created this magnificent tabletop mountain. But what's interesting about this place is not the age, but the fact that it still looks prehistoric. It's almost untouched. The reason for that is late exploration of this part of South America. By the way, we still discover new flora and fauna species living there every year. For a mountain, it's relatively short, only 9,220 feet. There are cities located at a higher pitch above sea level, say La Paz in Bolivia, whose elevation is 11,940 feet. So people could be living in the area of Mount Roraima too, despite its hard-to-get location. But there's a twist to it. The Pemon people are the original inhabitants of this region, and they have an incredibly rich tradition of myths. For instance, their mythology features deities that live on the tepui, which are flat-topped mountains found in the grasslands. These mountains are considered sacred and are off-limits to the living since they're believed to be the dwelling places of ancestor spirits known as Mawari. So, there are traditions that restrict living in this area, but still, some sources claim that local communities do dwell there. But, obviously, modern problems lie not only in the spirits, but in very much limited job opportunities there. However, guided tours are actually available. So what will you see if you ever dare to visit this place? At the base of the mountain lies an evergreen rainforest featuring trees that range in height from 82 to 150 feet, with some specimens reaching up to 200 feet. Some of them are endemic for sure, meaning that it's the only place in the world where you can find them. Like, you can find orchids as large as a medium-sized tree. It's not a surprise because due to the remoteness of this place, species here may have followed a completely different evolutionary trail, unlike most of the flora and fauna on our planet. Next, you have all the chances to stumble upon a waterfall at the base of Roraima that's been flowing for millions of years. Fun fact, there are no rivers on Roraima summit, but the rainfall seeping through the porous rocks create this incredible view. All combined together make it look like some lost world, right? By the way, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was inspired by Tepui, these tabletop mountains, when he was writing his The Lost World novel. Yep, it's not only Sherlock he was famous for. Among these natural wonders, Roraima stands out as the most accessible Tepui. There are more similar formations, but they're way less trek-friendly. Yeah, amongst other mountains, Roraima may be the easiest to get to, but still, it is very hard to get there, even taking into account all the modern technologies. So, how did the discovery happen? Hard to say for sure, but there is a theory backed up by official records. Back in the 16th century, here was this Sir Walter Raleigh. Look at his fancy collar and mustache. He was one of the most important people during the Elizabethan period. In 1594, he got to know about a great golden city near the Caroni River. That idea stuck in his mind. Maybe it was something like a get-rich-quick scheme for him. Anyways, 1 year later, he went to explore what is now Guyana and eastern Venezuela, and he described precisely Mount Roraima. On March 22, 1595, an English fleet led by Walter Raleigh showed up off the coast of Trinidad. Raleigh tried to make nice with the Spanish settlers there by trading and even inviting them aboard his ships for some entertainment. After a few drinks, the Spaniards opened up about a person having some particular activities in Guyana, sharing insights about the land's geography and the treasures they believed were hidden inland. Fast forward to April 7th, Raleigh pulled off a surprise attack on the town of San Jose and managed to capture this very person. After squeezing him for information, Raleigh declared his own plan to head into Guyana on a quest for the legendary Golden City. Since his ships couldn't navigate the narrow channels of the Orinoco Delta, Raleigh had his carpenters modify one of them, likely a galleass, to only draw 5 feet of water. This ship could carry 60 men, while another 40 were split among smaller boats. Progress was slow as they navigated through the delta, getting lost in what Raleigh described as a labyrinth of rivers. Eventually, they made their way to the Caño Manamo, and then into the main Orinoco River. A bit further upstream, where the Orinoco meets the Caroni, Raleigh encountered a native chief named Topiawari, and they hit it off. Topiawari revealed that his people had been pushed out of inland Guyana by a fierce tribe from the west. This fed into the prevailing belief, shared by both the Spanish and Raleigh, that El Dorado was home to runaway Incas from Peru. Topiawari also mentioned that the invading tribe was rich in gold, claiming that their nearest town, just a 4-day trek south, was the source of gold plates that were being traded far and wide. But he hinted that even finer treasures lay deeper in the land. Raleigh then made his way to the mouth of the Caroni, but strong currents halted any further progress. He sent out 2 scouting groups on land, while he led a 3rd one. They unearthed a few shiny stones that they eagerly dug out of the ground, but most turned out to be worthless. They learned that a massive lake about 40 miles wide lay at the head of the Caroni, filled with alluvial gold. However, with no way to move forward and the Orinoco's waters rising, Raleigh had to call off the expedition, hoping to come back when conditions were better. It wasn't until 1616, over 20 years later, that Raleigh got the go-ahead from James I for a second try in Guyana. He assured the king he could retrieve a lot of gold from a mine near the Caroni that he had heard about on his earlier trip. James specifically ordered him not to clash with the Spanish, who were still controlling the Orinoco area. When Raleigh arrived in South America, he stayed on the ship while sending Lawrence Kemmys and a team to look for the mine. For reasons that remain unclear, Kemmys ended up attacking and capturing the Spanish town of Santo Tomé, resulting in the demise of Raleigh's son Wat during the skirmish. Unable to find the mine, the crew returned to the ship, and facing Raleigh's anger, Keymis took his own life. Back in England, Raleigh was put on trial for allegedly lying about the mine and trying to provoke a conflict with Spain, which ultimately led to his execution. Or maybe those were the Maori spirits who didn't appreciate the intrusion. Closing the North Sea in a nearly 400-mile-long dam may save Europe from complete disaster. This is not some sci-fi stuff, it's real, and it's called NEED, Northern European Enclosure Dam. It's a last-ditch plan to save over 25 million people from 15 European countries from the rising sea levels. To build this giant bathtub, humans need one dam between England and France, another one between Norway and Scotland, 51 billion tons of sand, and almost 600 billion euros. As crazy as it may sound, this project is totally feasible, except for one teeny tiny detail. The scientists who had this literally life-saving idea don't want the dam to be built. First and foremost, the NEED needs, two dams. One that is 100 miles long and almost 334 feet deep in the English Channel, and another that is 300 miles long and more than 1,000 feet deep in the North Sea. Building something like this requires a crazy amount of materials, like the 51 billion tons of sand we mentioned before, which is basically all the sand everyone on the planet uses in a year. And yes, this dam would obviously be the biggest in history, smashing records like the Netherlands' 19-mile Afsluitdijk and South Korea's 20-mile Saemangam seawall. The NEED Dam would be 19 times bigger than Saemangam. It sounds ridiculous, but it's not impossible. You see, humans are pretty good at building big stuff. Oil rigs, for example, operate at depths of up to 6,500 feet, and the NEED Dam would only go down more than 1,000 feet. Plus, China has a 102-mile-long bridge, and the dam would only be 4 times longer. Besides, projects like this dam were done before for the exact same reason. It's our friend Afsluitdijk in the Netherlands, which was built almost 100 years ago. The idea here was to shut off a part of the North Sea called Zuiderzee and protect the Netherlands from all the flooding because most of the country is below sea level. They even drained one of the lakes formed by the dam and created a whole new province, Flevoland. Today, the Netherlands has more than 2,200 miles of flood protection, but it's only designed for a 15-inch sea level rise. Without it, the country would be underwater. So yeah, we could do it, but it's really expensive. How expensive? Well, it would cost around 550 billion euros if the project is wrapped up in about 20 years. One wrong step and humans can spend 100 years building this dam, and a couple of billion euros more. The good news is that this much money can be diluted over the 20 to 100 years it takes for the dam to get finished. Besides, the 15 countries it would protect could share the expenses, reducing the amount to only 0.1% of the GDP of all the countries. Not a bad deal to save millions of people, right? Okay, but is this monstrosity really necessary? Well, unfortunately, humans have managed to turn the ocean against us. This means that by 2100, the sea levels are expected to have risen between 1 to 2 feet. If we keep acting like it's none of our business, the rise can reach more than 16 feet by 2300. It may sound like a distant future, but NASA has just discovered that the ocean rose way more than they expected in 2024, which means global disaster is breathing down our necks as we speak. Let's go back to our geography classes for a moment and learn why sea levels are rising altogether. First, because land can sink. The city of Norfolk, Virginia, for example, was built inside a massive crater, and the earth there can erode and sink. Then the soil can get compacted. Because of that, the city is literally sinking into the ground, making it more vulnerable to flooding. In California, some areas are sinking too, but this time it's because of the movement of tectonic plates. Some of the land that is underwater goes up, some of the land over the water goes down. The consequences? Again, heavy flooding. Sea levels also rise if the planet gets too hot. This happens because of a thing called thermal expansion. It has a very scientific name, but it basically means that things like water get bigger if the temperature rises. Half of the reason why sea levels are rising is because of this. This is why the level of the ocean increases almost 10 feet every time the average temperature of the planet rises by 33.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Since 1880, the sea has risen more than 8 inches. Okay, so we build the Need Dam and the problem is solved, right? Well, building this dam comes with massive consequences. First, the ocean currents, think of them as underwater highways that deliver nutrients to tiny creatures like planktons, not the SpongeBob villain, and give rides to animals like lizards and tortoises. A dam this big is capable of messing up the ocean currents that bathe Europe, disrupting the food chain not just inside the dam, but outside too. The currents are also responsible for the climate of coastal areas. The Gulf Stream, for example, is a warm current that comes all the way from Mexico and makes the weather in northwestern Europe a bit more bearable. If the Gulf Stream got interrupted by a gigantic oceanic barrier, it could make parts of Europe even colder. Another problem is that the North Sea would turn into a gigantic freshwater lake. This would happen because the salt water that used to flow from the ocean would now be blocked. And the North Sea would only be fed by the fresh water coming from inside the continent. This process would eventually lead to a thing called desalination, when salt water gets less salty. And it's really terrible because saltwater animals would start to absorb more water than they should, making the cells of their bodies swell. The consequences can be fatal. The disruption of the ocean currents by the dam can also affect the renewal of oxygen in the water. Think of the ocean as a giant recycling system. Surface water needs to sink to deliver oxygen to the deep sea, keeping creatures dwelling at the bottom alive. Without the movement of ocean currents, oxygen would run out and toxic bacteria would take over, creating a poisonous environment for sea creatures. And this is not just a theory. It happened before, 250 million years ago. The ocean got so toxic, it wiped out 95% of marine life and caused a mass extinction. If it's not bad enough, the fishing industry would collapse, and the busiest trading ports of Europe like Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Hamburg would be stuck inside the dam. Sure, we could build sluice gates, but imagine all those traffic jams. The rain patterns of the countries protected by the dam would change too, affecting farming lands and food production. On the other hand, if we do nothing about rising sea levels, permanent flooding could make whole countries disappear. 3 million people on the islands of the Pacific would need to move away by the end of the century. The Maldives would lose 77% of its territories, and cities like Jakarta, Bangladesh, and Lagos would go underwater. Storms would get more dangerous too, destroying treatment plants for sewage and power stations and contaminating farmlands. Rising salt water could also contaminate freshwater supplies, and it's not just happening in Asia and Europe. Philadelphia, for example, is already developing plans to deal with this bleak scenario. This is why the scientists who developed this big red button shaped like a dam don't want people to actually build a dam. They know how bad things can get, which is why they came up with a plan so wild it's basically the engineering version of screaming, "Hey, stop ignoring the planet!" It's a warning. If we don't act now, we'll be stuck building mega dams just to keep our cities from becoming Atlantis 2.0. And let's be honest, nobody wants to live in a future where the apocalypse looks like the deep web version of The Little Mermaid. We all grew up believing that Stonehenge is the world's most ancient observatory, but now it has some serious competition for the title. Nabta Playa was built more than 2,000 miles away in southern Egypt and thousands of years before Stonehenge and even the pyramids of Giza. In 1973, a Bedouin guide stumbled upon a strange group of huge stone formations while crossing the Sahara Desert. He led American archaeologist Fred Wendorf to the site, located about 60 miles from the Nile. Wendorf's friend and colleague claims the team found the stones while stopping for a bathroom break in the desert. Either way, what they found changed history. At first, Wendorf thought the stone structures were just natural formations. But then it hit him. This area was once a lake, meaning no natural rocks should even be there. He kept coming back to the site for decades, and by the early 1990s, his team finally uncovered a circle of stones that seemed to line up with the stars in a way no one could explain. After 7 long years of trying to crack the mystery of the site, Wendorf reached out to an expert in archaeoastronomy. They study how ancient people used the stars. One evening, while the expert sat in the cool desert sand staring at the stones, he realized that they formed a pattern radiating outward from a massive burial mound. One by one, as they dug into the sediment, the buried megaliths started lining up like spokes on a wheel. The team had already used radiocarbon dating to test samples from fire hearths and tamarisk wood roofing found inside the stone circle. Nabta Playa had dozens of standing stones, all a few feet tall. Some of them lined up exactly with the sunrise on special days, and others matched up with bright stars in the sky. Inside the big circle, there were 6 special stones that may have been used for rituals or marking important times of the year. Around them, 29 standing stones might have worked like a simple calendar to help people know when it was time for something important, like the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. When the sun rose in just the right spot, it was a sign that the rainy season was coming. The stone circle once aligned with the brightest stars in the northern sky: Arcturus, Sirius, and Alpha Centauri. Some stones even pointed to the constellation Orion. By tracing Arcturus's movement across the sky, they figured out that it matched perfectly with the circle around 4800 BCE. That means it was the oldest astronomical site ever discovered. And the people of Nabta Playa may have been watching the stars thousands of years before telescopes were even invented. It looks like it had a huge meaning for people living and traveling through the desert. Over 10,000 years ago, the long, cold, and dry ice age that lasted for tens of thousands of years was finally fading away. Northern Africa got massive monsoons and rains that filled up seasonal lakes. So, parts of the desert turned into short-lived oases. For the nomadic people who roamed this harsh land, these summer rains were everything. Their entire way of life revolved around cattle. When archaeologists opened the central tomb at Nabta Playa, they dug up cattle bones and even a massive rock carved into the shape of a cow. The people who built it used the stars to guide them and find hidden watering holes like Nabta Playa, which likely held water for about 4 months a year, starting with the summer monsoons. But there was no North Star back then, so instead they navigated using bright stars and the way the sky seemed to spin in circles above them. When the lakes were full, the standing stones would be partly submerged, and from the western shore, you would see the reflection of the stars on the dark water. Nabta Playa is way less famous than Stonehenge, perhaps because its stones were buried and the famous site in England was open to visitors for thousands of years. Sadly, when Nabta Playa did become famous, some tourists ruined parts of it by moving stones around, which messed up the ancient star alignments. To protect it, the authorities moved everything to a museum where people can see the stones and the carved cow statue without damaging them. The Egyptian Observatory isn't the only construction similar to Stonehenge. It has versions that were used for different purposes from Germany and France to the US and the Andes in northern Peru. This last one is actually one of the oldest big structures ever built in this region. The circular plaza is made of 2 giant stone walls arranged in a ring. It was likely used for ceremonies and gatherings. Scientists have carbon dated it to be about 4,750 years old, which means it was built before the Great Pyramids of Egypt and Stonehenge. The plaza had 2 entrances and a special layer of clay, soil, gravel, and charcoal underneath. It was carefully planned and built. Archaeologists also found ceramic pieces, quartz crystals, and gemstones at the site, so it was definitely a special place. People visited it for centuries, but at some point it was sealed off, probably because of changing beliefs and traditions. The most recent discovery was the remains of a large timber circle roughly the same age and with parallels to Stonehenge, all the way up in Denmark. This open-air structure was likely part of a special area where prehistoric people from the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age gathered for rituals and ceremonies. The circle was made up of 45 giant wooden posts, forming a huge ring about 100 feet wide. The wood is gone now, but scientists believe tall timbers once stood in the holes and created an impressive wood henge. No one knows exactly what these circles were used for, but archaeologists have found animal bones and food remains at similar sites. So people probably used to gather there for feasts and rituals. In 2024, scientists found 2 ancient stone circles from the Neolithic period in Dartmoor National Park in England. Some archaeologists believe they might form a sacred ark. Many of Dartmoor's stone structures were built in a curved shape on the high ground in the center of the area. A long time ago, Dartmoor was covered in forests, so people may have used the high ground as important markers. One of the newly found circles fits inside this ark, but the other one is outside of it, to the north. This could have been an entrance point into the ark. There's also a raised bank of earth near the stones, which looks similar to other famous Neolithic sites, like the Ring of Brodgar in Scotland and Stonehenge itself. This means the people who built these circles may have visited Stonehenge or been inspired by it. Archaeologists in Oman found ancient stone monuments called tralith, which got the nickname Arabian Stonehenge. They were finished about 2,000 years ago, but no one knows for sure who built them or why. Scientists also found stone hand axes that are incredibly old, between 300,000 and 1.3 million years old, from the time when the first humans left Africa. At another site in central Oman, archaeologists discovered a Neolithic tomb from around 5,000 to 4,600 BCE. There are 2 chambers with the bones of dozens of people inside beneath a giant megalithic structure. Nearby, they also discovered rock carvings that were made by people who lived in the area. And then there is another Stonehenge look-alike, this time in Saudi Arabia, that was used as an apartment complex thousands of years ago. Archaeologists discovered a total of 345 stone circles by looking at aerial photos of a lava field. Each circle is between 13 to 26 feet and has at least one large standing stone in the middle. These structures still have remains of stone walls and doorways. Stone circles like Stonehenge are often linked to ceremonies and rituals, but scientists say that many early houses were actually built in round shapes, and rectangular homes only became common much later in history. This is a real human brain. Well, it was, until a hot cloud of ash turned it into glass. This crazy transformation happened almost 2,000 years ago, when Mount Vesuvius decided it was a good day to erupt and destroy cities like Pompeii, Atlantis, and Herculaneum. This particular brain belonged to a young man who lived in 79 CE in Herculaneum. Not the most famous Roman town, but it was the first place that was discovered under Vesuvius's ashes way back in 1709. Around 200 years later, archaeologists found the remains of this young man lying face down on a bed. All the smoke and ash probably made him disoriented, so while most of the citizens of Herculaneum rushed to the shore, hoping to be rescued, the brain guy ended up trapped inside a building and passed out. Weirdly enough, this saved his brain from completely disappearing. How in the world does a brain turn into glass? Well, when Mount Vesuvius erupted, it didn't expel just lava. It also sent away a really hot cloud of ash before the solidified lava could flow down. This type of lava, known as pyroclastic flow, could get as hot as 869 degrees Fahrenheit. An insane temperature, we know. Hot enough to melt your brain, but not hot enough to turn it into glass. The cloud of ash, however, can reach temperatures between 932 degrees Fahrenheit to 1,112 degrees Fahrenheit. But to turn something into glass, you don't just need heat, you need rapid cooling too. To put it simply, you have to heat something to a very high temperature until it melts into a liquid. If you let it cool down slowly, the molecules of this liquid will start to calmly organize themselves in the shape of crystals. But if this something cools down super fast, it will solidify in whatever shape the liquid was. It's like making ice cubes. If you pour water into a tray and stick it in the freezer, it will turn into ice because it cools down quickly. But if you leave the water out at room temperature, it'll just evaporate. This means that the brain melted due to a really high temperature, but before it could crystallize, for example, or just boil away, it got really cold. The flow from the eruption was not hot enough for this to happen, but the cloud of ash that reached town before the pyroclastic flow was hot enough to start this process, and fast enough to leave just at the right time. To figure out the exact temperature needed for this brain-to-glass transformation, scientists used a technique called differential scanning calorimetry. This fancy name basically means that they heat up glass shards to see when they start to change shape. They discovered that the cloud of ash had to be exactly 950 degrees Fahrenheit hot for the brain cells to start melting. Now, remember how I said this guy was inside a building, but most of the citizens were outside? Well, those people were also exposed to this drastic change in temperature, but they didn't turn into glass because they were not being protected by the walls of a building. The protection provided by the skull surely helped our guy, but it was not enough. And since other people didn't have the same protection, their brains basically poofed. And before you ask, no other parts of his body turned into glass. You see, you need some liquid for the glass-making process to happen. The brain has a lot of water and fat, which makes it a prime candidate for the glassification process. Yes, I've just made that word up. Other organs might have contained liquid, but they weren't as protected as the brain, so they were destroyed by the heat. And bones? Well, bones don't have enough liquid, so they just remained the same. The ones that didn't char, anyway. When the brain turned into glass, it looked a lot like an obsidian stone, a type of volcanic glass formed by the cool lava of a volcano. Even the forensic archaeologist who discovered this glassified brain thought it was just a stone at first. He was studying the bones of our hero when he noticed something shining inside of his skull, right in the middle of all the volcanic ash that filled it. To his surprise, this thing was way more fragile than obsidian and smaller too, with some fragments being only a few millimeters large. He only figured this was part of that guy's brain after he took the glass to the lab. With the help of a microscope, he discovered that this was not a stone but an organic tissue, which is basically cells that form our organs. This organic tissue was made by protein, a molecule produced by living things like animals and plants. And this was not just any protein. This one was specific to the human brain because every organ is made of different types of protein. The researchers also found nerve cells preserved inside this glass, complete with the tendrils that help them receive and send messages. The microscope also showed what was left of myelin, a fatty substance that gives a speed boost to the messages traveling along the nerves. This isn't the first time scientists discovered preserved human brains. In fact, more than 4,000 brains have been found since the 17th century. It may not look like a big number, but keep in mind that finding only the brain preserved in a skeleton while the other organs are gone is not that common. You see, the human brain is actually the first thing that decomposes when we're 6 feet under, and it usually turns into liquid. When scientists stumble upon a human brain, it's usually dried, frozen, or literally turned into soap. A brain can be dehydrated if a person perishes in a place that is very hot, like a desert. Frozen brains are found, obviously, in places that are super cold, like polar tundras. A brain turned into soap may sound weird, but the saponification process is not that rare. You need a lot of fat and oils to make soap, and the human brain is filled with this. It's a complex process, but if you find a brain that turned into soap, it must have been buried in a place that is very wet and has little oxygen. Back in 1982, for example, construction workers found dozens of human skeletons in a pond in Florida. They were all 8,000 years old, and 91 of them actually had their brains still somewhat intact. And by intact, I mean they turned into jelly soap. During the 2000s, the brains of 45 people were found in Spain, preserved because of this saponification process. This discovery helped researchers understand the chemical composition of the brains and even the weather conditions of the moment when these people passed away. Scientists also discovered two 3,700-year-old brains in Turkey that belonged to a middle-aged man and a teenager that were trying to escape an attack on their city. This time, the brains turned into charcoal because of a super hot fire. And even though their skulls preserved the brains in this state, the heating and cooling process was probably not intense enough to glassify them. But this? It's the first time in history that scientists have found a brain that naturally turned into glass. It's like finding a unicorn, but in a more scientific way. So what does this discovery mean? Well, for starters, it gives us a glimpse into the lives of those who existed such a long time ago. Secondly, it taught scientists an amazing way to preserve the human brain. It also shows just how powerful nature can be. Powerful enough to turn a brain into glass, but delicate enough to preserve it for thousands of years. So, let's give a shout out to the young man who unknowingly contributed to science. He probably had no idea that his brain would one day be the star of a groundbreaking discovery. His tragic end has given us a fascinating peek into the past.
Miles and miles of yellow sand, treeless mountain ridges, and scorching hot sun over your head. And suddenly, something you'd never expect to come across in a barren desert. A small group of overexcited people. They're as happy as you would be if you'd won a lottery. They've just found an ancient tomb, once flooded with its walls in bad shape. But the stuff they discovered inside proves that this is the burial site of one of Egypt's most mysterious pharaohs. Historians have been hunting for his tomb for years, but no one expected it to hide ancient treasures. Fast forward. After careful examination of the site, Egyptian officials have announced the discovery of the tomb of King Thutmose II. It's the last missing tomb from Egypt's 18th dynasty. And this is also the first royal tomb found since King Tutankhamun's was discovered in 1922, in more than 100 years. A team of Egyptian and British archaeologists found the tomb in the Theban Mountains area, west of Luxor, near the famous Valley of the Kings. Before this, the site was only known as Tomb C4, but during their excavation, the team found clear evidence proving it belonged to King Thutmose II. Archaeologists actually found the entrance and main tunnel leading to the tomb in 2022. But at first, they thought it belonged to a queen because it was near the graves of Thutmose III's wives. It was also close to Queen Hatshepsut's tomb. Originally, it was prepared for her when she was just a royal wife. But everything changed when she became pharaoh. But we'll talk about this twist of fate a little later. But soon they realized that their discovery was much more significant. They found alabaster jars with Thutmose II's name and the words "deceased king" written on them. That's when they realized that the tomb was actually his final resting place. Sadly, Thutmose II's tomb has seen better days. According to the head of Egypt's antiquities sector and the leader of the Egyptian excavation team, the tomb suffered major damage from ancient floods not long after the pharaoh's death. Water swept through the burial chamber, likely destroying or displacing many of the original artifacts. Much of what had been once inside the tomb was moved elsewhere in an attempt to salvage it. The researchers found out that the tomb had a basic design, with an entrance, a sloping main corridor, and a burial chamber. The corridor was coated in white plaster and rose about 4.5 feet above the floor of the burial chamber. A large staircase and a very large descending corridor of the tomb indicated its grandeur. It took the team a long time to navigate through, though, as the tomb was blocked by flood debris and collapsed ceilings. Only after crawling through a 32-foot passageway with a small 16-inch gap at the top, the worst nightmare for those of us with claustrophobia, were they able to reach the burial chamber. There, they were in for another surprise. They cleared the debris, expecting to find the crushed remains of a burial beneath. But the tomb turned out to be completely empty, and it was not due to robbery. It had been deliberately emptied. The researchers soon realized that the tomb had been flooded since it had been built underneath a waterfall. It happened just a few years after the king's burial, so the contents of the tomb were moved to another location. That's why there was a second corridor in the tomb. It was most likely made to help remove King Thutmose II's body from his flooded tomb. Despite the damage, the excavation team made some really exciting discoveries. They found traces of mortar decorated with blue inscriptions, yellow stars, and fragments from the Book of Amduat, one of the most significant funerary texts in ancient Egypt. The book was meant to guide the deceased through the underworld, ensuring a safe journey to the afterlife. Now, how about we sneak a peek at ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty? It was all about conquering lands, expanding the empire, and building jaw-dropping monuments. Some of the biggest names from that era, Thutmose I and Thutmose III, both legendary warrior kings who left their mark in history. Thutmose I was a fierce fighter who led major military campaigns, pushing Egypt's border further south than ever before, all the way to the fourth cataract of the Nile. His victories gave Egypt access to new trade routes, stronger political ties, and more wealth. His conquests were so significant that they were recorded in the tombs of his top officials. Thutmose III, sometimes called Thutmose the Great, took things even further. He was not only an incredible military strategist, but also the commander of Pharaoh Hatshepsut's armies before becoming king himself. He led between 17 and 20 military campaigns, winning every single one and expanding Egypt's empire to its peak. He even created the world's first navy. Thutmose III is often remembered as Egypt's greatest warrior pharaoh. And sandwiched between these two powerhouses was Thutmose II, a pharaoh who doesn't get nearly as much attention. Hey, the middle child, right? His reign lasted only about 5 years before he passed away at around age 30 in 1479 BCE. He is kind of a mystery. No one really knows what he accomplished. For the longest time, even the location of his burial site was totally unknown. His body was actually found in the 19th century. It was just lying around in the mortuary temple of Deir el-Bahari, in a secret chamber where priests used to hide royal mummies centuries after their original tombs were looted by grave robbers. In other words, Thutmose II's body must have been moved from his original resting place at some point in history to protect it. During his lifetime, Thutmose II made at least one major impact on Egyptian history. He married his half-sister Hatshepsut. That might not sound like a big deal, but it helped her become Egypt's greatest female pharaoh after he passed. The catch? She kept her stepson, Thutmose III, off the throne for decades. When he finally took power, he erased her name from history out of spite. And still, Hatshepsut is one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, no matter if you're talking about a man or a woman. She brought a lot of wealth and art to Egypt. She led a big trading trip to a place called Punt, where she brought back things like gold, ebony, and incense. She also made sure her name lasted by building amazing structures that we can still see today. At Karnak, she added huge obelisks. One of them is still standing tall. She also was the one to build the Temple of Deir el-Bahari with its countless columns. She was buried there. Interestingly, Hatshepsut was often shown in art as a man with muscles and a beard, like how pharaohs were usually depicted. But she made sure there was always something in the artwork that reminded people she was a woman, like calling herself Daughter of Re or His Majesty herself. When she passed away in 1458 BCE, Egypt wouldn't have a female ruler as powerful as her until Cleopatra, about 1400 years later. According to Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities Secretary General, isn't that a mouthful? Hatshepsut's name actually appears in Thutmose II's tomb, meaning she might have even handled his burial. As for their final resting places, well, Hatshepsut was buried in the Valley of the Kings, and Thutmose II's mummy is now in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, alongside other ancient Egyptian rulers. It gives visitors a rare chance to see the remains of a nearly forgotten pharaoh. Now, experts consider the discovery of his tomb to be one of the most significant in recent years. The artifacts found there add important details to our understanding of the history of the region and Thutmose II's rule. And even though the tomb's design is fairly simple and follows the same architectural style preferred by later Egyptian rulers, its historical importance is undeniable. In any case, the mission isn't over yet. Archaeologists are now focusing on solving another mystery. Where did the rest of the tomb's contents end up? The team is determined to continue their search. Who knows what other secrets they will uncover that have remained hidden beneath the sands for thousands of years. The red, parched earth under your feet is shaking. Large cracks are opening in the ground, threatening to swallow you. But unlike on Earth, these quakes aren't coming from within the planet. A threat coming from space is triggering them. Scientists have made a shocking discovery about Mars quakes. By using AI and NASA's InSight data, they found out that some of those tremors are caused by meteorite impacts. It means that Mars gets hit 2.5 times more often than we thought, and new craters are forming all the time. But the scariest part is that these impacts don't just shake the ground. They send powerful shock waves deep into the planet, revealing a hidden seismic highway and an unstable interior, unlike anything we imagined. This changes everything we thought we knew about Mars. So now, the big question is, what else is lurking beneath the surface? But let's follow scientists' train of thought first. They took Marsquake data from NASA's InSight lander and compared it with fresh impact craters spotted by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. That's when they discovered that some impacts create a seismic highway through the mantle instead of being absorbed by the crust. Even though NASA shut down InSight in 2022, its data is still precious. The lander, which placed a seismometer on Mars, recorded over 1,300 Marsquakes, some caused by underground rock cracking under heat and pressure, others, apparently, by meteoroids slamming into the surface of the red planet. By studying how seismic waves move through the crust, mantle, and core, scientists keep piecing together Mars's deep structure. In the past, researchers already linked impact craters with seismic data. But these new studies are the first time when a fresh impact has been connected to quakes detected in Cerberus fossae. That's a highly active region 1,000 miles away from InSight. Scientists have discovered this 71-foot-wide crater much farther from NASA's InSight lander than expected, if we consider the strength of the seismic waves it produced. Mars's crust was thought to absorb most of the energy from impacts, which would limit how far seismic waves could travel. But the analysis of this crater revealed that, instead of getting dampened, the waves took a more direct and deeper path through the planet's mantle. This unexpected finding suggests that Mars has a seismic highway, which allows quakes to spread much farther than previously believed. Now, the InSight team will need to reassess their models of Mars' internal composition and structure. And then, we might better understand how impact-generated seismic signals can reach such depths. Manually sorting through the vast amount of data would have taken years. But luckily, these days, there are new tools, and scientists can go from tens of thousands of images to just a few in a matter of days. So, researchers focused on finding craters within approximately 1,800 miles of InSight's location. Their aim was to identify those that formed while the lander's seismometer was active. By comparing before and after images from the context camera over time, they identified 123 fresh craters to cross-reference with InSight seismic data. Out of those, 49 craters were potential matches for quakes detected by InSight seismometer. And after conducting some more analysis, the team decided that the 71-foot Cerberus fossae impact crater was the main finding. This discovery is likely to help scientists differentiate between signals from internal quakes and those caused by meteoroid impacts. Initially, they believed that Cerberus fossae produced a lot of high-frequency seismic signals linked to quakes originating inside Mars. But the new data suggests that some of this activity may have been caused by impacts, not internal processes. Another mystery scientists haven't been able to crack for 50 years is why Mars is split into two very different halves. But thanks to recordings of Marsquakes, they may have finally found the answer. Since the 1970s, researchers have known that Mars has two distinct regions. The northern lowlands cover about 2/3 of the planet's northern hemisphere, and the southern highlands make up the rest. The southern highlands sit about 3 miles higher than the northern lowlands, and the crust, the planet's outer layer, like a shell, is thicker in the south. This strange divide is known as the Martian dichotomy. There are two potential explanations for this imbalance. One theory suggests that an unknown internal process within Mars created the difference. The other claims that a massive collision, probably with a moon-sized space rock or several smaller impacts, once reshaped the planet's surface. But Mars' surface is extremely old. That's why pinpointing exactly what happened has been difficult. But now, a new study, published on December 27, 2024, has used Marsquake data from NASA's InSight lander to figure out whether the cause of this difference lies deep inside the planet. InSight was positioned near the boundary between the northern lowlands and southern highlands. Its mission included recording seismic data from Marsquakes, which travel through the planet's mantle, the rock layer beneath the crust. So scientists compared how these waves moved under both lowlands and highlands. They looked for differences in the planet's deep interior. It turns out that the seismic waves lost energy much faster when traveling through the southern highlands. It means that the mantle beneath this region is significantly hotter than in the north. It's compelling evidence that internal planetary forces, rather than an external impact, caused Mars' unusual split. The research team believes that the temperature difference between Mars' two halves can be traced back to ancient tectonic activity. It once shaped the planet, but later stopped. At some point in the past, Mars had moving tectonic plates, like Earth's. As these plates shifted, they, along with the molten rock beneath them, could have created the Martian dichotomy. But eventually, the movement stopped, leaving behind what scientists call a stagnant lid. That's a thick, immobile layer over the planet's molten interior. If this turns out to be true, it might mean that the mantle beneath the southern highlands is still pushing upward, while the mantle under the northern lowlands is sinking deeper toward the planet's core. This ongoing process could explain why Mars' crust is thicker in the south. At the same time, we can't completely rule out the idea that an external impact created the dichotomy. Some recent studies suggest that a giant collision could still be a possible explanation. To solve this mystery for good, scientists will need more Marsquake data and detailed models of how Mars originally formed. By the way, if you ever decide to visit Mars, you might come across the hero of our video today, the InSight lander itself. It was supposed to launch in March 2016, but a problem with one of its instruments caused a delay. It was a vacuum leak in the seismometer. NASA rescheduled the launch for May 2018, and the issue was fixed in the meantime. But this delay increased the total cost from $675 million to $830 million. Still, InSight successfully landed on Mars on November 26, 2018. But over time, dust built up on its solar panels, making it harder to recharge. The InSight lander runs on solar panels and batteries, but it needs occasional wind gusts, called cleaning events, to clear dust from the panels. Unfortunately, the place where InSight landed didn't get enough of these winds to keep the lander fully powered. By February 2021, during the Martian winter, thick dust had covered the panels, and they were only producing 27% of their full capacity. To save power, NASA started putting InSight into hibernation mode, shutting down instruments gradually to keep its electronics warm. They hoped better weather would allow the lander to recharge and wake up by July 2021. In May 2021, the team found a clever way to restore some power by using the lander's arm to move sand onto the panels, helping the wind clean off some of the dust. But eventually, InSight was only generating 1/10 of the power from the sunlight than it did right upon arrival. In July 2022, NASA put it in low-power mode to keep detecting Marsquakes. The lander kept operating until December 2022. On December 20th, NASA announced that InSight had lost contact with Earth on December 15th, and the mission officially ended on December 21st, 2022.
Make a choice. 2 pills. One red, one blue. Take the blue pill and nothing changes. Take the red pill and you will see the world as it really is. A simulation. Yep, that's the plot of The Matrix. But the idea that we are living in a virtual world might actually be true. And the best part is, you can break free from it. Scientists call it the simulation hypothesis. Everything you see, feel, and experience might be part of a super detailed high-tech computer system. From your heart racing when you meet the love of your life to that fancy car you've always dreamed of, none of it is real. Let's say this theory is correct. How would it work? There are essentially 2 types of virtual worlds we could be trapped in. First, we have owned simulations. There is a clear central commander, like a game master, pulling the strings of everything we experience. Think of it as a video game. In this case, you're like an avatar from The Sims and someone's controlling your world. This higher being picks your job, decides when you need to go to the bathroom, and might even start a fire in your kitchen, just for fun. Okay, maybe fun isn't the best word, as it's more like sociological research. This super intelligent creature might have created a simulation to see how human history unfolds. They might be testing different events with different starting points, just to see what happens and how we, and other creatures of our planet, face different challenges. For example, this time they tried putting dinosaurs on the planet to deal with that huge meteor impact. Turns out, they didn't. All they want to do is test the problem-solving skills of humankind. That might explain why they didn't put us in a 100% happy, perfect virtual world. Okay, but who are they? Who is controlling our simulation? It could be some transcendental being, something beyond our ability to comprehend. Or it could be extraterrestrials. If one galactic civilization figured out how to create a high-fidelity simulation, they could make billions of virtual civilizations. Each of those could have trillions of beings. All they would need is more powerful computers. In fact, this may explain why we have never made contact with any extraterrestrials, even though there are probably 36 other civilizations out there in the Milky Way. If we are living in a simulation controlled by cosmic beings, we won't be able to see or contact them unless they want us to. Our great architect could also be a super advanced AI, like a control freak version of ChatGPT. And that brings us to the second type of virtual world we could be trapped in: hostless simulations. These run without a boss, just like AI-generated stories. In this case, the creator is gone, but the simulated world keeps going on its own. Think of Star Wars Galaxies, for example. This game, based on the world-famous franchise, came out back in 2003. It was an open-world multiplayer game, which meant you could freely explore a huge, interactive map without being forced to follow a strict path. But its servers were shut down in 2011. That wasn't the end of it, though. A few loyal fans still play it on private servers. The problem is that developers stopped updating it, and without anyone keeping an eye on what players are doing, it opens the door for more glitches. Things that go beyond what the game was originally designed for, and definitely shouldn't be there. But the game is still running. Now, apply this Star Wars Galaxies situation to our reality. In the hostless simulations theory, the universe is a mess and humans are a glitch. Instead of being purposefully created, our consciousness and existence might have just emerged by a technical accident. So we might be nothing else but a bug in the code, like anomalies stuck inside a simulation with no owner, running on autopilot. But that can lead to a doomsday scenario. If the simulation gets overwhelmed with glitches, it could eventually collapse. See, the more we learn, the worse it gets. Our cultural and intellectual evolution might trigger a game over or a frozen screen because the owner of the simulation, whoever they are, might not want us to figure things out. They could reset the system or get rid of the source of the glitch, which, by the way, could be humanity itself. That's kind of like the Final Fantasy XIV situation. The game was originally released in 2010, but it was a mess. Players ran into all kinds of bugs and technical issues. Things got so bad that the game was shut down, and the developers decided to rebuild it. Then they released a new and improved version called A Realm Reborn. And a rebirth might be exactly what's in store for us. In fact, about 100 years from now, we might create an AI capable of running simulations of all humanity. It would use data from internet archives, DNA samples, photos, videos, and so on. This means that everyone who ever lived on Earth could be recreated in a virtual world, and in some sense, be born again. The problem, though, is that we don't have perfect knowledge of the past, especially the more distant times, so the simulation might not be 100% accurate. Whether our universe is controlled by some higher architect or the random powers of a super advanced AI, some experts believe that, yes, it is possible. Here are a few ways we might be able to hack the simulation. Hack number 1. Start by exploring the illusion. Look for its rules or flaws, and check for weird patterns or things like déjà vu that might point to its hidden structure. Hack number 2. Overload the system with massive amounts of data. This could eventually cause errors and push the limits of the simulation. Hack number 3. Crash the whole system by making everyone aware of it, for example. At some point, the simulation either shows its true form or just shuts down completely. The whole idea that we're living in a virtual world is definitely fascinating, but is it real? Let's talk numbers. Some scientists believe there is a 50-50 chance that Earth is a simulation, but the odds might be actually much higher than that, because there are an infinite number of potential simulated worlds. And inside each one of them, there are simulated people who have created even more simulated worlds. So, mathematically speaking, the chances of finding yourself in the one true physical world are almost zero. Although it is really hard to prove it, some experts believe that evidence is everywhere. It could be as simple as feeling a déjà vu. You know, that strange feeling when you think you've experienced something before, even though it's happening for the first time. That could actually be cracks or temporary flaws in virtual reality. Another possible evidence is what is known as the Mandela effect. This is when a large group of people remember something differently than how it actually happened, like a shared false memory. For example, a lot of people remember the iconic "Luke, I am your father" from Star Wars. But what Darth Vader actually said was, "No, I am your father." For some people, this is enough evidence to prove we are part of a simulation. And while we haven't found the red pill just yet, we now know it's not impossible to crack the code. So it might not be a bad idea to let Keanu Reeves know about this, just in case. Scientists discovered the largest water reservoir in the Oregon Cascades. It's hiding underground, holding more than twice the water volume of Lake Mead. Let me specify. It contains at least 19.4 cubic miles of water, which is almost 162 trillion bottles of water. If you drank one bottle a day, it would take you around 444 billion years to finish your stock. No wonder this underground aquifer discovery is so awesome. The Cascade Mountain Range, which contains the largest aquifer on Earth, stretches about 700 miles from Northern California to British Columbia. The high Cascades in Oregon have younger volcanic rocks, around 8 million years old. The Western Cascades are much older, 45 million years. They boast deep canyons and valleys. Scientists study the transition zone between these two areas to understand how water moved through volcanic rock and how volcanic processes had evolved over time. In the process, researchers measured rock temperatures at different depths. That's when the underground aquifer discovery happened. Normally, deeper rocks should be hotter because it's closer to the Earth's interior. But to everyone's surprise, in several areas, the temperature stayed the same even at greater depths. Well, this was a strong clue that water was flowing through the rock and cooling it down. In other words, the Cascades function like a natural water tower, storing and slowly releasing water into rivers and streams. These geological water findings are important for two main reasons. First, it's our potential water source for the future. Such a massive amount of water stored underground could be an important resource. So far, we don't know how long it will remain in its current state and how resilient it's going to be to changes. So, we need more research to properly manage its use. Secondly, it affects volcanic activity. When water seeps deep underground and reaches magma, it instantly turns into steam, creating extreme pressure that can trigger explosive volcanic eruptions. Understanding how much water is stored in volcanic rock could help predict future eruptions and the risks they pose. Now, even though this discovery is exciting, there are still many unanswered questions. Like, how does this water move through the volcanic rock? Or how much of it is actually usable as a water resource? Since this underground reservoir depends on rain and snow, a series of dry years could cause big problems for both water supply and volcanic stability. Researchers are now working to understand the full impact of the Cascades volcanic water reservoir and how to manage it responsibly. But let's look closely at the geological wonder that is the Cascade Range. Picture this: a massive mountain range stretching all the way from Northern California up to British Columbia, cutting right through the middle of Oregon. That's the mountain range we're talking about. In Oregon alone, it's about 260 miles long and up to 90 miles wide, covering 17,000 square miles. Whoa, that's bigger than each of the 9 smallest US states. The coolest thing is that the Oregon part of this mountain range is basically built by volcanoes, and apparently contains at least one volcanic rock water storage. The range itself exists because of something called the Cascadia Subduction Zone, where the Juan de Fuca tectonic plate, a chunk of Earth's crust under the Pacific Ocean, is slowly getting shoved beneath North America. As it sinks, the intense heat and pressure force water out of the oceanic rock. It lowers the melting point of the surrounding mantle and creates magma. That magma rises up and fuels the Cascade volcanoes. This is part of the Ring of Fire, the giant belt of volcanoes circling the Pacific. So, in a way, the Cascades are part of a much bigger volcanic system that's constantly shifting and changing. The Oregon Cascades are actually made up of two completely different zones, the Western Cascades and the High Cascades, and they look nothing alike. The Western Cascades are the older part. They formed around 45 million years ago. These mountains are rugged and deeply carved up by rivers. Some canyons are as deep as 3,700 feet. This part of the range used to be volcanically active, but over time, erosion has taken over, reshaping the land. The High Cascades, on the other hand, are much younger and way less eroded. Around 8 million years ago, the volcanic activity shifted, and new eruptions filled in old canyons, smoothing out the landscape. Eruptions kept piling up fresh lava, and rivers in this region didn't have as much time to create deep valleys like they did in the Western Cascades. That's why if you look at the two regions side by side, one looks jagged and carved up, while the other looks smoother and more built up. Some of Oregon's most famous volcanoes are located in the High Cascades. I'm talking about Mount Hood, Mount Jefferson, the Three Sisters, and Crater Lake, which actually formed when Mount Mazama erupted and collapsed in on itself. Unlike smaller volcanoes that pop up, erupt for a bit, and disappear over a few months or years, These giant volcanic centers have been active for thousands of years. And because they've been around for so long, they have way more complex magma systems. They produce everything from basalt, which is a runny, fast-moving lava, to andesite, dacite, and rhyolite. And rhyolite is the type of magma that leads to huge explosive eruptions. So, while some of these volcanoes might just ooze lava, others have the potential for devastating blasts. Another amazing thing about these long-lived volcanoes is that their underground magma chambers stay hot for a really long time. That's why the Cascades are one of the best places to tap into geothermal energy. There's a ton of heat just sitting beneath the surface, waiting to be used. Oh, and don't forget about the Cascades volcanic water reservoir. Who knows how we will use it in the future? Now, we already know that the Cascades are part of the magnificent Ring of Fire, Earth's most explosive zone. Imagine a massive horseshoe-shaped belt wrapping around the Pacific Ocean, stretching for about 25,000 miles. It's one of the most geologically active areas on the planet. This is where Earth's tectonic plates are constantly shifting, colliding, and grinding against each other, creating some of the world's most powerful earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and deep ocean trenches. The Ring of Fire follows the meeting points of multiple tectonic plates, and they all surround the giant Pacific Plate. These plates aren't just sitting still, they're always on the move, pushing against or sliding beneath each other at their boundaries, known as fault lines. When this happens, you get everything from deep-sea trenches to towering volcanoes and violent earthquakes. One of the most extreme examples of this activity is the Mariana Trench, located east of Guam. At 7 miles deep, it's the deepest ocean trench on Earth. It was formed by a process called subduction, where one tectonic plate is forced beneath another, sinking deep into the Earth's mantle. The Mariana Trench is one of the most mysterious places on Earth. It's insanely deep, with crushing pressure and total darkness. So for a long time, people thought nothing could live down there. But it turned out that life existed even at the very bottom. In 2005, scientists found a tiny single-celled organism in the Challenger Deep, the deepest part of the Mariana Trench. They also came across colorful rocky formations and weird sea cucumbers. The Mariana Trench also has hydrothermal vents, which are basically underwater hot springs. Even though the water there is super hot and acidic, strange creatures and microscopic life forms still manage to survive there. The Ring of Fire is also responsible for 90% of the world's earthquakes. Some of the most powerful quakes in history have happened here, including the 1960 Valdivia earthquake in Chile, the strongest ever recorded, which hit a mind-boggling 9.5 on the Richter scale. But it's not just about earthquakes. The Ring of Fire is also home to about 75% of the planet's volcanoes. Some of the most famous eruptions in history have come from this region, like the infamous Mount Tambora in Indonesia. In short, the Ring of Fire is one of the most dangerous places on Earth, but it's also incredibly fascinating. Who knows what else scientists might discover in that region, like they discovered the largest water reservoir in the Cascades.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like.